It's 5 o'clock, and we're going to call this work session to order. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this work session is a presentation and discussion on the budget work session number 1 of 4 for fiscal year 2025 budget cycle. At this time, we're going to have roll call. As I say your name, please indicate that you are here by saying present. Director Song?
Present.
Director Cook is absent. Director Clark?
Present.
Vice President Farah?
Present.
And myself. And so we're going to go ahead and start this presentation. Again, this is number 1 of 4, and I call upon Superintendent Vela to start us out.
Thank you, President Margell, members of the board, team. My team is excited about presenting to you. It's been a while since we've come back to you, but wanted to kind of set the stage for the evening that my team has brought to you, I would say, a pretty detailed presentations on our budget over the last couple of years, moving into what you're going to hear tonight. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Mr. Ben Rarick, our Associate Superintendent of Finance.
First of all, checking that you can all hear me. I think I'm using this version of the. So it's my pleasure to be presenting to the board this evening on work session number 1, and joining me is our esteemed budget director, Ms. Lisa Tyler, and she'll be helping me walk through some of this content with you. Before we jump in, as we do with each of these work sessions, the PowerPoint itself is very hefty and there's a lot of information, so we'll take a minute to do some time budgeting. The first chunk of this presentation is a chunk that I think board members who have been on the board for a while have seen before. It is the 101. And I see Director Cook, so that makes it actually, now we have 2 board members who may have seen this section for the first time. But if you're sitting there wondering, wait a second, is this exactly what we got last year? It is what you got last year. It is designed as a 101. I'll probably move pretty quickly through those slides. It is really for the benefit of Director Song and Directors Cook, who, for whom this may be their first exposure to school district budgets. But in the absence of questions, I'll move briskly through that section. Really, the objective this year, as it is every year with workshop number 1, is to give you a first taste of what we would call the revenue side of our budget process this year. So we'll talk about what we know for local levy revenues, what we know for state apportionment revenues, which ties in very closely with our enrollment projections. And to the extent that you have detailed questions about that, Director Tyler is our resident expert on those matters. And then we'll also talk about federal revenue, at least what we know thus far, the headline of which essentially is that the largest source for, or one of the largest sources of our federal revenue, ESSER funding, is of course disappearing next year. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into the presentation. We started this presentation last year with a similar theme about what the Superintendent of Public Schools, Superintendent Reichdahl, coined as a perfect storm for school districts. It's been a year since we had that conversation, and since then there have been 3 districts, I believe now, that have entered binding conditions, or 3 that I know of. The Tukwila School District, the Marysville School District, and I believe the La Conner School District. I know there are a number of other districts that are sort of on deck, but they're all sort of affected by these similar dynamics of declining enrollment and expiring federal funding, and the effects of inflationary cost factors as well. Luckily, we are a district that is not anywhere close at this point to binding conditions because of our healthy cash position. But as the board well knows, we're planning for a future of declining revenues with not apparently declining costs, and how we can bridge those gaps. The presentation will go over these 4 major subject matters. First, the basics of school district budgeting. Secondly, we'll provide a legislative update of the major changes that we saw. I understand that Director Clark is also going to be providing an update at the full board meeting, so we look forward to that. Some assumptions about enrollment and revenue forecasting at the state level, and finally some concluding thoughts. Again, for the benefit of the new members, want to walk through a basic set of budgeting 101 slides. When you receive your budget briefings at each board meeting, we tend to focus almost exclusively on the general fund, but it's important in times like these to realize that the district actually has 5 primary funds. The general fund, the capital fund, the associated student body fund, the transportation vehicle fund, and the debt service fund. And you can sort of think of those as a parallel to in your personal life, you may have different funds or accounts that you manage, a checking account, a savings account, perhaps a 401k, perhaps a health savings account. And they each have their own rules, and sometimes you can mingle money between these, and other times you very specifically cannot. It's very similar for school districts and all public entities. The general fund is by far and away that which occupies most of our attentions. It's sort of like your monthly household budget, if you think of it that way, your regular operating expenses. Our major revenue sources in our general fund are state apportionment, which is driven pretty much, not entirely, but mostly by the enrollment that we bring in the school district, that students that attend our system, and by our local school levies, which are a function of obviously going to our voters and seeking approval for taxing authority. A district receives what's called an apportionment report, which anybody here at this table or watching can go and pull up on our website. You go to OSPI's website, and we think of that sort of like our pay stub, so every month, whereas you all get a pay stub where you can kind of see the details of why you received the amount that you received. Similarly, each school district gets an apportionment report where it ticks through why we received the revenue that we received across the various programs. The Capital Projects Fund, which is certainly very relevant now as we go to the voters for a capital levy here in the next couple of months, is primarily for building and renovating schools and supporting the technology needs of a school district. It has 3 primary revenue sources, those being the sale of bonds to the extent that we are authorized by our voters to sell bonds. We were unsuccessful with that last year. Capital and technology levy, which we're going out to the voters for on April 23rd. And there's a variety of sundry revenue sources in the capital fund that are much smaller, but sometimes school districts are eligible for state match funding, for example, if they're building a school. Sometimes we're able to collect impact fees from builders in our community, etc. The Capital Projects Fund has a lengthy set of requirements that by and large segregate the purposes from other funds. And if you were so inclined, you could click on that link and learn about those in more detail. The third fund we're going to talk about today is the Associated Student Body Fund. Those ASB budgets are for the students and done by the students, so think of those as student budgets. They are under the control, supervision, and approval of the school district, so while we extend to schools and student councils a great deal of latitude in terms of how they want to spend the money they raise, ultimately the school district is responsible for the stewardship of those funds to make sure they are lawful. Revenue sources typically include things like ASB card dues, ticket sales, student store, yearbook, fundraisers of this type. And the best way to think about how ASB money is spent is to think about the acronym CARS, C-A-R-S, which stands for cultural, athletic, recreational, or social. So if a student council wishes to propose a program of expenditure, it really has to fit into one of those 4 letters. Is it cultural in nature? Is it athletic in nature? Is it recreational in nature? Or is it social in nature? Another easy way to think of this is the school district is responsible for the basic program of curricular, and then there is like co-curricular or extracurricular that is beyond the bounds of that, and that it describes the universe that is more appropriate for ASB activity. Another fund that we have stewardship of is the Transportation Vehicle Fund. So when Justin Dennison comes to you once a year and says I'm about to buy a bus, it's typically because Justin is keeping very close track of the amount of money the state provides on their funding depreciation schedule. And it's up to districts essentially to decide whether they're going to buy new buses or used buses, gas buses or electric buses, or large or small buses. Now, you've seen recently, and we've had some activity just in this legislative session about incentives to get school districts to inch closer to non-diesel buses, electric buses, anything that has a smaller carbon footprint. But ultimately, those decisions are left to the local level. Currently, the state runs a depreciation schedule that assumes that our buses will last 13 years, so the amount that they fund us on is under the assumption that we are replacing budgets on that cycle. And again, for you to be very interested, I've provided you the links to the regulations if you really wanted to bore into the details of the Transportation Vehicle Fund. The final fund that I'm going to go over today is the Debt Service Fund. The Debt Service Fund is, I think, a colloquial way to describe it is to think about paying your mortgage. So when a school district goes out, gets a bond passed and sells bonds, we sell those bonds to large institutions, right? Those institutions buy our bonds and we reap the liquid assets of that sale, and then we go and build schools and make renovations, right? Well, we have to pay back those purchasers of those bonds. And so we pay those back on an amortized schedule over many years, much like an individual pays off their mortgage over, say, 30 years on a monthly basis. And so really when we're managing the debt service fund, we are managing many of these so-called mortgages. We might have quite a few of them going over a 20, 30-year period, and keeping track of which are paid off and which are pending, and how much that means we need to pay out each year, okay? And so we collect taxes from our constituents to make those payments out of the debt service fund. But important to note that the only way in which the debt service fund is utilized is if we pass a bond, right? So we still have some pending debt from our prior approved bond, but to the extent that we lean into a capital levy strategy, we lean less and less into the debt service fund. Okay? In all of these funds and our stewardship of them, we try to use the example of a household budget to make it less technical and less complicated. In the same way that your household budget is driven by a few major cost drivers, be it your housing, be it your transportation, so too our school district budgets. 85%, sometimes even more than that, of our budget is driven by the costs of the people of the school district. And so to a great extent, your staffing is your budget, at least in the general fund. Okay? Some good principles of budget decision making to keep in mind are first that, at least at the board level, we try to distinguish and keep separate issues of technical budget administration from high-level policy considerations of the board. And like household budgets, a few decisions drive most of the dollars. Decisions that you make about contracts and staffing really provide the contours of what was last year almost a $500 million general fund. There are a lot of competing interests in a budget, so board members have to sort of prepare themselves for the fact that there is no budget that exists that pleases every stakeholder. No single budget pleases everyone. It's important to budget both for the short and the long term. It's easier to see the short term because those are the sort of the pressures that are in front of your face. But past history tells us that long-term considerations are just as or perhaps even more important. And finally, it becomes an issue of what the policy priorities of a board and a district are, because a school district budget should tell a story about the policy priorities of a school district, and we think of the budget as being nested within our strategic plan and our strategic priorities. And we work to be able to tell the story about how those key decisions that are driving most of the expenses in budgets are nested in our core values and our strategic priorities for the coming year. Any questions before we get into some of the details of first updating the current year budget status?
I had just one quick question.
Yes, sir.
I'm not too familiar with how the match funding works at a education level. Typically with the state, they do like a 50% because they're on the biennium with funding. With match funding for schools, is it a one-to-one?
Did you say match?
Match funding?
Match funding?
Yeah. Is that how that works for the school districts?
Um,
Because like with other state agencies, say like DSHS has a budget.
Yes.
They'll submit that to the state will reimburse 50% of it, and then the following biennium, they'll help recoup the rest of it, because they're always kind of 2 years behind. When it comes
Okay.
to school districts,
Yes.
is it similar, or is it a one-to-one match?
It's dissimilar. I think I know what you're talking about. There are certain state agencies where the ability to claim federally is calibrated at a percent.
Yes.
So like 50% or 75% or whatever that may be. Remember that from my days as a legislative staff person. In K-12 education, by and large, I can't think of any exception to this. We can make 100% of claims in a year for our federal programs. Unless you can think of an exception to that, yeah. So we are dissimilar to some of these other, I think transportation is another program where federal matching is sort of calibrated at a certain percentage of expense. What we have to do is ensure that 100% of the expense we're submitting for reimbursement is allowable, right? So they'll calibrate our match if it's disallowed in some way, but as long
Okay.
as we meet the regulation, it's a full match.
Thank you.
Clarifying point?
Yeah.
So just clarifying point, just
Yeah.
if we don't claim 100%, in most cases, we're allowed carryover. So that's kind of, to answer your question,
Oh.
so it's not in some cases it is, but it's not in all cases, use it or lose it.
Okay.
So many of our grants have carryover provisions,
Thank you.
which are capped, there's not, can't
Yeah.
carry over forever, all of it, so.
Thank you very much.
Okay. First, like to also provide a update on current year spending. We've been keeping the board pretty focused on our current rate of spending relative to same date last year as a way of saying, okay, what is the size of the hole that we are trying to fill going into the future? So here's 3 ways to look at our current year spending. Remember, this is year-to-date spending this year through January compared to year-to-date spending last year through January. So it's a apples to apples, but it's not comparing the months of January. It's comparing all the months up through January, okay? The bottom set of bars is total. So through January, we are spending 8.45% more through the month of January than we did through last January. What we're doing above is starting to disaggregate that. So when we look at compensation, which is all staffing, all salaries and benefits associated with that staffing, that is up about 6.4%, okay? So if that number's lower than the 8.45, that tells you something else is much higher, right? Which is drawing that number higher. And that is what we would sort of just globally refer to as accounts payable. So anything that's non-salary, those can be supplies, materials, travel, equipment, anything of that nature, is up 20%, 28.59%. So the weighted aggregate increase is 8.45%. And then here's a further way of disaggregating it. So this just looks at the categories of compensation, okay? It looks at certificated salaries, classified salaries, and employee benefits. Interestingly enough, employee benefits is actually just a smidge down because the state payroll tax rates are down. So we're about even there. But classified salaries are up 13.6%. Again, that's not salaries purely. It can be a combination of staffing and salaries, right? So if we've filled more vacancies plus paying more, right? It's a combination of the two. And certificated salaries are up 7.5%. Okay, so that sort of contributes to visualizing this graph, which I know your eyes are now acclimated to, right? Which is that we know from looking at fiscal year 23, which is to the far left. We know from looking at fiscal year 22. We know looking at fiscal 23, which is in the middle, that we have foreseen for some time now that with ESSER revenue, we were fine, right? In fact, in 22, we received more revenue than we were spending, and our fund balance grew. That's the one on the far left, right? In the middle, we spent just about as much as we took in. Again, that's a good place to be, right? And our fund balance remained roughly constant. But in each case, we were relying on that little gray bar at the top, which is that non-reoccurring ESSER revenue. So now we're looking at the current year and starting to look at these slides that we just looked at to go, okay, where do we think this is headed, right? And so two things remain true at this point. There's been some positive developments lately, and we'll speak to those in a second. But two things remain true, which is, number one, that gray bar that you see reflected on the far right, very top of the orange, is going away the next time we do the bar chart for fiscal year 25. So you're starting with the concept of replacing that revenue, either through new revenue sources or declining reduced expenses, right? But that's not all that's going on. The other thing is, well, how quickly is the blue bar increasing such that it may outpace the size of the orange bar, even when incorporating ESSER, right? So I think the last time we presented publicly, the rate of expenditure was suggesting to us, well, I should say the rate of expenditure and the projected revenues at that time were suggesting to us that blue bar was growing pretty rapidly and that would persist to grow pretty rapidly, putting us in a situation where we could be up over that orange bar by over $10 million or more. That is no longer the thinking at this time for at least 3 reasons. The first is, as you'll learn this evening, got a little bit of help from the legislature, not like substantial, but enough to talk about, and we've spent some time doing some research to tell you what that would be. The second is that we did do a little bit better in January apportionment than we anticipated, and there's a little bit of additional revenue there that we have incorporated into our projection. And finally, there are parts of this, and I know I've shared this with you, some of you before, that you only know when you know. One of them is the special education safety net application. That's not something we get in an apportionment report, and it's sort of hard to predict. In fact, yesterday was the completion of yesterday after was the certification and the signing of that we will be submitting the largest special education safety net application in the history of the Kent Public Schools. If we receive that revenue, our estimate of that revenue will go up pretty materially. So I guess it's good news in the sense that there are a few things turning our way, which means that we think that that gap between the blue and the orange is not going to be quite as wide. So as we sit today, our estimate has not changed of a $56 million ending fund balance, but you need to know that will change as the spending year unfolds, and we will continue to update you as we get closer and closer to the summer. Part of the question we get is, so what's the landing spot? What are we trying to stay above? And so this chart is trying to commit to writing what your board policy specifies, which is a series of steps and calculations. The first is the board basically articulates in policy that it's the goal of the district to have a 5% fund balance, but that's not as simple as just taking 5% and multiplying by the budget amount. It specifies some very specific steps. The first is that it's 5% of prior year expenditure. So the first thing you have to do is guess what you're going to expend in the year you're in. The second thing is that that number excludes anything that is considered non-spendable fund balance, restricted fund balance, or committed fund balance. The challenge with that is a number you know when you know it, and is somewhat difficult to predict with great precision. But basically, Ms. Tyler and I went back over the last 5, 6, 7 years and so what's a typical sort of experience that we've seen in that. And you know, I think a good faith estimate right now is $10 million. So that means that you would need $10 million on top of the $26 million 5% calculation, putting you at $36 million. So to put that number in perspective, I added 2 numbers here. One is a average monthly expense for KSD that includes everything in the general fund. So I think I did this last month. So it was September through February, I think. So 42.9 million is just a simple average on a typical month of how much we spend as a district. It does vary. There are months where we have stipend payments and things that are higher months, others that are lower, but that's a good, that's an average of the first, 5 months of the year. And then 36.4 million is the average payroll of those same months. So it puts that $36 million in perspective. It's actually pretty close to that monthly payroll number in terms of, that wasn't necessarily by design in the policy, but that's how it's working out.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
How catastrophic would it be if,
That's quite an introduction.
That's-
this is just, I'm just curious.
Okay.
If the board.
Can we use a different term?
So I understand the 5%.
Yes.
That's something that is in there as a safety net.
Yes.
However, in our board, I guess, the descriptions,
Yes.
does it specify how that 5% valuation has to be determined? Like, is there any realm of possibility of, say, because we're in this situation right now, could we just give ourselves our own bond based off of property value? And then for the fiscal year of 24, 25, base the 5% off of increase in property value, and then project 25, 26, and then possibly increase that 5% to say 6%, or whatever the delta might be between what we should have gained?
I appreciate the question. Let's work on that one a little bit. So I'm gonna, so that I understand your question. You said give ourselves a, I think you said give ourselves a bond. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you had?
Kind of, if we just moved around those numbers a little bit, rather than taking 5% and then putting that, I guess, the liquidity of the cash into essentially our savings.
Yes.
Could we rephrase it in our policies that 5% can also be incorporating contingencies of an increase in property value of the properties that KSD owns, just so we can still stay within our policies, but then still reduce the amount of liquid cash flow that we might have to essentially cut.
Okay, I'm with you now. Okay, so you've asked a factual question, and I'm going to make a distinction between what I would recommend and what you could do as a board, okay? I'll state the obvious. The board wrote the policy to begin with, and can certainly, as a majority, would have the power to amend it. I'm not recommending that, but you certainly have the power to do that, okay? You know, once you get into the space, the only way, you were kind of using the term of like loan. There are situations where districts give themselves loans between funds. That is typically only in truly cash poor situations where a district may not be like truly underwater, but they're having a hard time within a month of a year making payroll. So they might anticipate ending the year with cash, but in the month of like March, like just before April taxes or something, they anticipate, you know, it's like a cash flow thing, right? So I'm sure there's probably examples of like you're a salesman and you've got like 1 month every year that it's a tough sales month. You know by the end of the year it'll even out, but it's that. So school districts don't collect all their money equally every month. So, but that is typically a procedure that is invoked only when a district, it really is in question whether or not they're going to be able to meet their general fund obligations in a month. Kent School District has gone through that and did in fact do an interfund loan in 2017, 18, I believe was the first year. We are a long ways away from that right now. I just want to be clear. We're not in a cash precarious situation as we sit here today. But the challenge in answering your question is there are innumerable variables of how you could rewrite your policy. I don't recommend rewriting it, just to be clear. But, you know, the policy, and part of the reason for having this slide is that the policy, we're not exercising a lot of discretion here. The policy is very specific about step 1, step 2, step 3. This is not like a, what do you think? It's very prescriptive in terms of how that number is calculated. Does that help?
Yeah, I again, like, this isn't it wouldn't be the best financial decision to make, but I'm thinking if we needed to make that much in cuts and 5% of that is 26 million that we'd have to put into our unassigned fund.
Hold on to.
Yeah. Could we find another way to still meet that 5%, but then reallocate that 26 million to help offset some of the cuts?
But I think, if I may here, one of the suggestions you made, and not to get into the details, is to use a non-liquid asset that's based off of a projected value, right? And to me, that sounds a lot like the housing crash, where people borrowed from their home equity loans or their home equity, and then when the housing market fell, they lost their house. We don't lose houses, we lose schools, and I mean, I don't even know if we could borrow, I don't even think like that we could actually do all of that, but it's a non-liquid asset, and so your ability to be able to turn it into payroll, and we have to pay payroll.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would be a
I think this, I think I've heard
scary
something
move.
similar to this about the Seattle School District. This might be in reference to.
definitely Seattle is
Yeah.
doing that. I just wanted to say I appreciate that question. The creativity is a great question. I also wanted to add, and I believe I would need Mr. Eric to, the financial health of a district is also something that's looked at by our Moody ratings and others. And so could you speak to a little bit about that? So the 5% fund balance are districts that have more than that.
Yeah,
But that's related to some financial health pieces as well.
Yes. And trying to stick to facts here. So the quickest red flag to a lower bond rating is kind of constructing an operating deficit around short-term loans. And that's actually what happened to Kent. So when Kent went to an interfund loan from the Capital Projects Fund, which at that point they had an approved bond, first thing that happened was that S&P, was that Moody's or S&P? One of the rating services dropped us to a BBB rating, which was somewhat unheard of for school districts, especially large school districts. We're now in the AAA. I think we're an A3 rating right now. So there are consequences.
Could you, just to make sure,
Yeah.
why is that important? Why is your bond rating important?
Yeah. Bond rating is important. Well, actually, we have an expert here. Do you mind weighing in on the question of bond ratings, Lisa? Sorry.
Well,
If we just keep looking, maybe somebody else will continue to answer.
Lisa has some background.
I say Paul can answer that question. No,
Well,
just kidding.
so really, it's just a key financial indicator, of the district's financial health, right? So if, creditors, taxpayers, citizens in general.
It's like your credit rating.
Yes, credit
Right,
rating. I mean,
exactly.
anyone
It's
with
credit
credit
rating.
rating.
Personal credit rating.
Absolutely.
But isn't it also the fact that when we do put bonds out there, that the money that we have to pay then
Yes.
and put into our bond fund
Yes.
goes up? And so in the future,
Yes.
we're paying more for the money to be
Yes.
able to borrow.
And that
So
happened
that's
to
what the
us.
difference in the bond rating really
And that
has.
happened to us in a very real way when
Yeah.
we sold bonds in the, I think it was the spring of 2018, we paid significantly for the fact that we were a triple B.
And then I also assume that the market and who can buy a triple B compared to, you
Yeah.
know, triple A paper.
Yep.
There's a different market.
That
and
is
so-
exactly right. In fact,
Yes.
there's a, well, maybe just 30 more seconds on this. There's a specific case of that for CAT, where when we sold bonds, I think it's, indulge me, I'm not exactly sure, I think it was the spring of 2018. There were several large institutions that just said, we're not even gonna be part of the sale. And when we inquired as to why, or our representatives inquired on our behalf, they said, we don't touch triple B stuff. I said, well, our bonds are guaranteed by the state. Why are you even concerned about that? And they said, doesn't matter. If it's on our sheet, our shareholders see it, it's a prestige thing. We want it off of our, we won't have anything that's triple B on our paper, whether the state guarantees it or not. So that impacted the district in a very real way. You got fewer people interested in buying our bonds. So there's a, I think of it as a very simple way as your personal credit score. Are you concerned about that? Yes, you are. It's your ability to go out and get credit,
Yeah.
right? And it affects school districts similarly.
I appreciate the thinking and creativity. Yeah, it's a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a better idea of the
Yeah.
broad spectrum. of
Yeah.
kind of what's
Absolutely.
within
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
possibilities.
Yes,
Great
and
question.
to, you know, to your point, there are districts talking about those sorts of things, so it is appropriate to bring up. We're not in a financial situation yet
Okay.
where that is in our immediate reality. But I know the Seattle School District and others that are kind of searching for answers have entertained those sorts of creative solutions. I'd like to walk you through what we know at this point about the results of the Washington State Legislature. Before we get into this, we beg your indulgence a little bit. So they wrapped up last Thursday. We don't have from OSPI their was it 203 tool that summarizes what we're going to get. So we've tried to do some of our own calculations, do some of our own research, just because we knew we'd be meeting this evening. This isn't everything, but we think it summarizes the big pieces, okay? There were 4 issues that we were tracking very closely that we thought could potentially have a material impact on our district and our revenue outlook. Those included the MSOC allocations, which is just the non-salary component of what the state sends to us. Some bills on paraeducator staffing and compensation, pupil transportation, and special education. Now, we refer to it as inclusive education, but all the bills that you will see from the legislature use the term special education. And I'll use that term this evening so we're clear what we're talking about at the state level. Starting with MSOC. House Bill 2494 was the vehicle that was funded in the budget that basically recognized that districts are incurring inflationary pressures for non-salary costs. And we did come out to the better on this one. The first thing the legislature did was increase the rate by $21 per student. Probably the more impactful thing is that it actually started the allocations in the current school year. So from what we understand, we will be receiving payments in the summer, reflecting retroactive enhancements for the year we're in now. That's somewhat uncommon for a supplemental budget. They typically work, like in this year, they'd be working in the 23-24 year for funding that would be occurring in the 24-25 year. In this case, they're actually going to be crediting districts additional funding in the year we're literally this year. So we expect to receive a lump sum in June. Again, this is not going to be like redefining the fundamental nature of what we're facing, but it helps, right? They did add some language on it to say that the increased allocation is intended to address growing costs in the enumerated categories and may not be expended for any other purpose.
Comment?
Yes, go ahead.
If it helps to view those amounts in terms of percentage, we had it's a 1.9% increase. to the MSOC rates. That's the 21 per student. So it's 1.9%.
The Paraeducated Burial Senate Bill 5882 created some enhanced staffing ratios for school districts. We think this could mean somewhere in the range of like 6 to 8 additional units for us. This is also one that I believe takes effect this year again. So as I explained about the lump sum payments in the summer. But the legislature is very fond of compliance language this year. So you noticed in the previous slide, they went to great lengths to say, we're providing it for this specific purpose. We're going to collect data to make sure you spend it on that exactly, you know. And again, here in this case, OSBI will be in the place of writing regulations to say that districts use the additional funding to support increased staffing or prevent layoffs or increase salaries for the following staff types for this year. And that they will charge OSPI with collecting data to ensure. So the turn of phrase is artful there, because preventing layoffs is different than increasing staff, you know. But the language is getting increasingly restrictive coming out of the legislature, which reflects a mood there about how districts are using dollars. Pupil transportation, I had high hopes that we would maybe get an improved pupil transportation formula out of this session. We did not. I have received a few calls from some of our labor partners believing that we got a big sum of money. We did not get a big sum of money. I'm going to briefly explain what that might be in reference to. OSPI essentially had to go back to the legislature and say, hey, we don't actually have enough money in our budget, the OSPI budget, to fully fund our current funding formula. So they were short funded in their ability just to implement the current law. So you'll see in the budget a fairly sizable increase. That is not a flow-through increase to school districts to enhance the formula. That's just to be able to pay the existing bills. So that doesn't change what we expect to receive. That changes OSPI's ability to just pay what they were supposed to pay to begin with. Okay? So nothing that really transpired this session is a fundamental redefinition of what the current transportation formula does. However, they did charge OSPI with doing essentially a formula study and to develop a transparent, predictable, and comprehensive funding formula in the future. There was one thing they did do, which is and I believe the amount is $400, that they're going to provide a $400 enhancement for each student who qualifies as a McKinney-Vento transportation eligible kid. We currently have about 150 active McKinney-Vento students receiving transportation. And I think Justin thought it was like somewhere between 250 to 300 for a full year, depending. But right now so it's not going to be a huge sum of money, but it does recognize the unique costs that we incur in transporting those particular students. And then there's a lot of activity in the legislature about ensuring that school districts that privatize their transportation make sure they provide benefits. We are not such a district, so it does impact us, but it's a hot topic in the legislature.
How much do right now, are we fully made whole for the costs that were incurred for the McKinney-Vento? And do we know how much?
Just the McKinney-Vento kids?
Yeah.
No, without being able to cite specific budget numbers, we and pretty much every school district are underwater in terms of the costs that we incur to transport those students. We're glad to do it, and that's especially for kids that needs that service.
Yes.
But it's a very expensive service
Yes, it is.
for which we are not reimbursed.
Okay.
And I think that's why you're seeing this bill, because districts got together to say, this is a huge deal. And it is.
The other piece for the board on that note, for students that qualify, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are definitions for school of origin for a child that's deemed without consistent housing. And as you can imagine, they'll move to different parts of an area, and transportation still needs to be provided to the school of origin. So what does that mean? That if the student, we had this for many years, moved to the Seattle Highline area, they still need to transport to their school of origin, if that's what was best for the child. So in that, we share costs. Is that correct, Mr. Eric?
Yes.
And so you can imagine the amount of communication it takes with liaisons to be able to make sure all of this is being coordinated, all of it for the benefit of the child. So.
There was a lot of activity, time check, I'm going to be moving just a little bit more quickly. In special education, there was a lot of legislation that didn't necessarily settle the way we had hoped as a district. It looks like the only sort of substantive thing that this bill did was increase the funding cap to 16%, which doesn't impact us because through February we're at 12.1%. So that amount of money that came out of the legislature is going to impact a subsection of school districts across the state who were very high on their percent of enrollment. So I'm happy for them, but just for clarity, it's not necessarily a KSD impact. The one thing that is a KSD impact is that we're going to go through another state audit review, which the legislature has quite an appetite for apparently. And so they provided additional funding in this space to do an audit of all school district special education spending, I think. There's some more granular language there, but seems to be continuing interest of the legislature. 5 years ago, we were up over 50% of the state budget that was dedicated to K-12, 2%. We're now at 43%, so there's been a slow depletion of the K-12 share. The COLA percentage, the IPD, which is the number one thing that I get asked about, they just tell me what the IPD is, was 3.7%. And there were a few things that didn't appear in the general fund that are still impactful to, potentially to Kent. The Safe Routes Schools funding received an enhancement in the state transportation budget. That's a grant program, so districts sort of apply and get or don't get, as the case may be, but there was an enhancement to that program, as well as grant funding for districts to transition to zero-emission buses. Okay, now in terms of the actual budget process, this is the timeline that we're operating on, and right now we're on that second row of March 13th. We are now able to report to you that our ESSER claims are complete. The chart you see on the left is through January, so you'll notice that there's not full claim, there's a few $100,000 outstanding in that chart. But as we sit here today, all ESSER money has been claimed. This will be the final year. As to enrollment, wanted to take a minute to highlight the issue of birth rates and how they're affecting school districts in King County. The first chart is a Washington State chart relative to the nation. And you'll see that birth rates in Washington have been declining even more than the national control group. Okay? And then the next one is King County specifically. And so notice that 2016 was our high water mark in King County for live births in King County, and we have been declining every year. Now we're talking about as a county, not necessarily as a district specifically, but as a county, every year since then. And so interesting that King County population during the same time grew almost 20%, but birth rates declined. So you have people moving to the region, but not necessarily having children. So maybe coming for jobs, but okay. So what that means for us is that the likelihood is that each entering kindergarten cohort gets smaller. So as our senior class graduates each year and we bring in a new kindergarten cohort, we are replacing a larger cohort with a smaller cohort to the extent that these trends continue. So this is our updated four-tiered enrollment chart, updated through February And you can see that, at least optically, it sort of looks like we're rebounding in 23, 24 until you look at the colors at the bar and realize that the biggest growth is in the green, which is kids leaving our school district to go to Running Start.
When people are moving to King County, are they not moving with children?
So I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're asking me like, I don't know. I got this data and tried to make sense of it myself. And what I'm coming up with is, people are coming here probably for jobs, right? With or without kids. But once they're here, they're not having kids at the same rate that they were a decade previous. But I don't want to pretend to know the answer to that. I mean, I'm not a demographer or whatever. I just know that we're seeing it on the entering cohort side, and all of my colleagues are seeing it. And what the underlying sociology of it is, I just don't really know.
So,
Yeah.
just to clarify, so remember, this is just birth rate data?
Yeah.
This isn't families moving here with, already 3 or 4 or 5-year-olds,
Yeah,
So
that
it's
was-
just
that was what
tracking-
my
It's
question.
just tracking the birth rates, so then, yeah, there could be a whole nother piece to that puzzle of people moving in and out that do have pre-K age kids, but apparently not.
Yeah, which could explain, to Lisa's point, why the population continues to grow, right? It's just the birth rates and ostensibly the entering K cohorts that are growing. So a key piece of information we wanted to share with you are the enrollment projections. So there's 3 columns here. The left column shows the current budget enrollment projections. The middle column shows where we're at currently in terms of actual enrollment. And the far right column shows next year's budget projection. Is that clear? So current year budget, actual, next year. And really what you're going to take away from that, and we provide both the general and total numbers because, there's always the, well, does that include the Running Start, et cetera. So you see it both ways. And so next year's enrollment projection at both levels is roughly about 150 less than what we're seeing currently now, regardless of whether you use the version that includes Running Start and iGrad or not. Okay? And that is one factor of that, not the only factor, but one factor of that is the entering K cohort being smaller. The other thing that I guess works in our benefit is that, the reboundary was very, very difficult in terms of predicting enrollment by school. We actually came pretty close predicting an aggregate, but boy, tracking those pathing reports through the summer to make which school are these kids going to show up? That was a frustrating process in the fall for us, for schools, for everything. And so now we've got sort of a newly established pathing that will bring hopefully more stability to our buildings. In terms of our local levy, we're not talking about capital levy here for just a second, but the operating levy, we operate under state caps, remember. We can either assess a tax rate of $2.50 per thousand, or we get capped at a per pupil amount, whichever is less. So here's how that manifests for KSD. The blue bars would reflect how much we would be able to raise if we could raise $2.50. You can see why the legislature imposes a per pupil cap, because districts that have any amount of property wealth, I mean, if Seattle were on there, their blue bars go through our little roof here, right? So it compresses and creates a sense of equity that, if you're Orcas Island, you can't raise, $40,000 a student, right? The orange bar represents the effect of the per pupil cap. And primarily what I want you to see is we're pretty darn close to that cap. We're under it, but it's starting to become a factor for us, okay? And so what happens oftentimes, if I showed you this graph for all the school districts, a lot of districts, their gray bar is above the orange bar. They get authorization from the voters to collect more than the law allows them to, and then they roll it back. That's the legal term. It's levy rollback. I think what voters need to understand is we are not that aggressive in our ask. We've actually asked for less and continue to ask for less than the state per pupil cap requires. So when we get in these narratives during levies about, well, you guys are really increasing, you know, we are among the districts that asks for less than what the per pupil cap will allow, and this sort of illustrates that for the levy that we just passed on the EP&O side. Here's what you're looking at the capital and technology levy. We need to keep this in front of the board and the community, that green gradient bar on the right, just look at the size of that in proportion to our overall taxing authority. This is a hugely impactful thing to our school district. And that green gradient bar is what is before the voters on April 23rd. So you'll see what we looked like in 2023, where we had a greater share of our tax rate as light blue. That was our debt service on our bonds. We didn't get a bond approved, right? So this is a shift in strategy to move to capital levy. Capital levy failed, so you see at the very top, the box of unutilized taxing authority. And then, so if the levy doesn't approve, the green gradient top bars all go blank. And so I thought it would help you to see it in proportion to the other taxing authorities. But this is a big deal for the Kent School District in terms of the overall amount that we raise from our taxpayers. So here are the key takeaways as we're at 556. Even though our current year fund balance is still projected to decline, perhaps less than we were anticipating back in November, December, but still, we're fine on a cash basis right now. We're in no need to do any interfund loans. We've got plenty of fund balance right now. We project to have well more than a full month's worth of operational expense at year end. But then you start to get into the story. So enrollment is down, as you saw, since 2018. Birth rates are also down, as you saw. And entering K cohorts are down, and we would expect to continue to be down. Next year is our first year without $31.5 million of annualized revenue, and that creates for us a structural deficit. Without reductions, the district would basically deplete fund balance and filling that hole. And that's not an unanticipated thing. We've been talking about that as a district for nearly 3 years now, seeing that this was what was going to materialize and planning accordingly. So our multi-year stair-step budget strategy does require reducing staff and services, and hopefully also some increased revenue as the legislature recognizes the factors that are impacting school districts. As the superintendent has led us in thinking about, you know, putting our money where our mouth is on our strategic plan, our reductions have started at the central office. And there's a clear prioritization in terms of central office versus protecting schools to the extent that that can be done. And that we're not alone in this, that there are a number of other districts that are struggling with these same issues. And if anything, we're starting from a position of strength because we had a healthy fund balance at the outset. And our goal obviously is to maintain that position of strength going forward. That completes our presentation. 558.
Yes, sorry.
It's 558.
Yep, I was going to see if there was 2 minutes worth of questions, but Director Clark, any questions?
No.
Yes, sir.
Stunned into silence, maybe?
So it is 5:58, and we are going to adjourn this work session for approximately 30 minutes and move into an executive session. The purpose of this executive session is to discuss the performance of a public employee, potential litigation, or the legal or financial risks of a course of action. We will see everybody back here around 6:30. It is 6:30, and we are calling the regular meeting of the Kent School District Board to order. First, we will have a roll call for all of our board members. At this time, I will call each of the board members' name, and if you are present, please indicate by saying present. Director Song?
Present?
Director Cook?
Present.
Director Clark?
Present.
Vice President Farah?
Present.
And myself. Director Song, will you help us say the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have another great evening of a lot of audience a lot of audience joining us tonight. So I welcome all of you that are here in the room. Also, welcome to all of those who are joining us online and those of us who are watching recordings in the future. So this is a meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. We welcome the public's participation in the board meeting and thank those of you who have come to this meeting and those who are viewing our live stream. The purpose of board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public. During the meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from visitors. Whether made verbally in person, verbally on video, or written, comments are limited to a total of one per person per regular board meeting. One additional comment per person may be submitted for a public hearing topic if there is a public hearing on the agenda. All forms of public comment are subject to Chapter 4256 RCW, Public Records Act. The public may comment at public board meetings in a manner authorized by state law. All comments must adhere to Policy 1420 and Procedure 1420P. If you wish to make a comment to the board, comments forms are available for completion prior to the meeting and must be turned in no later than the beginning of the legislative report. No forms will be accepted once this report has begun. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Public comments will be heard after the opening, during preliminary communication from the audience, at specific agenda items, and during final communication from the audience. Students will be the first to speak on any topic. Please state your first and last name prior to beginning your testimony. Abusive public comments personally directed towards the board, staff, or students will not be tolerated. The use of specific names or personally identifiable information of board, staff, or students is not allowed. Board members or KSD staff members may interrupt and terminate an individual statement when not adhering to Procedure 1420P. All comments, whether verbal or written, must adhere to the standards of civility as defined in Policy 1400, Meeting Conduct, Order of Business, and Quorum. If you're seated in overflow room, there are seats in here. Please come join us. But there is a brief delay in the live stream audio. We will allow extra time for you to make your way into the boardroom after your name is called. Individuals with items for the board or superintendent must provide items directly to Safety Services staff. Approaching the dais during the board meeting is not allowed. Any items turned in will be provided to the board and superintendent following the meeting. And Director Cook, I invite you to lead us in the land acknowledgement, or read it to us, please.
We acknowledge we are gathered upon the ancestral lands of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, who historically lived throughout the area between the Cascade Mountains and Puget Sound.
Thank you. We are now to item 1.07, agenda review. And Superintendent Vela, is there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, President Margell, there are 2 changes to the agenda. We'll be adding Kent Ridge High School robotics travel to Portland, Oregon field trip and student travel authorization as consent agenda items 6.12, and Kent Ridge High School robotics travel to Houston, Texas field trip and student travel authorization as consent agenda items 6.13.
Madam Chair, move approval of the agenda with the suggested amendments.
Second.
Seeing that we have a motion made and seconded, I see if there is any discussion. Seeing no discussion, I will call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
That is 5-0, motion passes. We now move on to recognition, and we have We will start with Education Support Professionals Week, and Vice President Farah.
Thank you. This is a proclamation for Kent School District, and this is how it goes. Whereas education support professionals are involved in nearly every aspect of education, maintaining buildings and grounds, preparing and serving meals, keeping schools facilities clean and orderly, assisting in the classroom, providing over 60% of all instructional hours to special education, English language learners and opportunity gap students, and performing and conducting research activities, providing information, technology and media service, administrative support functions, and safe transportation, creating a secure and healthy environment, and many other specialized services. And whereas these dedicated individuals, who are the backbone of our public education system, deserve recognition and thanks for the outstanding work they do for this state, their communities, and students enrolled in Washington's public schools, colleges, and universities. And whereas there are over 62,000 education support professionals working with and helping students in Washington's universities, colleges, public schools, and whereas education support professionals are instrumental in fulfilling the state's responsibility to educate all students, and whereas by supporting the learning environment, education support professionals and crucial partners with teachers, parents, administrators, and school boards, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors, Kent School District, proclaims March 11th through 15th, 2024 as Education Support Professional Week. Signed this date, 13th day of March 2024, by all board directors and the Secretary of Board, Israel Vela.
Thank you very much. Our next recognition is Proclamation Women's History Month from Director Song.
So this is the Kent School District Proclamation, Women's History Month, whereas women of every race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of the local community, the state of Washington, and the nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. And whereas women have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, educational, and social roles in all areas of life, and whereas women have played a unique role throughout history by providing the majority of volunteer labor force, and whereas women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and cultural institutions in our nation, and whereas women of every race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background served as early leaders in the forefronts of every major progressive social change movement, and whereas women have been leaders not only in securing their own right of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also in the abolitionist movements, the emancipation movements, the industrial labor movements, the civil rights movements, and other movements, especially the peace movements, which create a more fair and just society for all. And whereas women have served our country courageously in the military, and whereas despite these contributions, the role of women in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in the literature, teaching, and study of American history. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaims the month of March 2024 Women's History Month in Kent School District and urges all citizens to join in this observance, signed this 13th day of March 2024 by the Board of Directors of Kent School District and Secretary of the Board, Israel Vela.
Thank you very much, Director Song. Next, I have the privilege to be able to read to us Music in Our Schools Month. Whereas the National Association for Music Education has designated March as Music in Our Schools Month to focus on the nation's attention on the need for and benefits of quality music education programs. And whereas the Music in Our Schools Month is an annual celebration that engages music educators, students, and communities from around the country in promoting the benefits of high-quality music education programs in schools. And whereas Music in Our Schools Month is a time to highlight the importance of comprehensive, sequential music education taught by exemplary music educators. And whereas the study of music contributes to a young young people's development through heightened skills in listening, reading, self-expression, and creativity. And whereas music education in the schools includes a broad range of types of music and active musical experiences. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaim the month of March as Music in Our Schools Month, signed this 13th day of March 2024 by the Board of Directors and Secretary to the Board, Israel Vela. Our last proclamation today by Director Clark, School Retirees Appreciation Week.
This actually is from the state of Washington. Proclamation, whereas Washington State recognizes the accomplishments of all retired school employees, and whereas important to acknowledge the value of educating and assisting retirees in meeting the special challenges retirement brings and work to improve their general welfare, and whereas school retirees and organizations like the Washington State School Retirees Association aid in advancing education by supporting high educational standards, and whereas school retiree organizations such as the Washington State School Retirees Association Group promote group and individual involvement in charitable projects and activities, sponsor scholarships, and maintain interest and participation in education and community activities, and whereas retired educators are encouraged to remain active in the education profession through volunteer activities associated with learning. Now, therefore, I, Jay Inslee, Governor of the State of Washington, do hereby proclaim March 18th through 24th, 2024 as School Retirees Appreciation Week. And as a school retiree, I am pleased to look out in the audience and see one of my colleagues that went on and served not only in the Auburn School District as a teacher, but obviously went on and served on the Kent School Board, and now is back to participate in trying to advance the education of this district.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our directors for helping read our different proclamations. We are now on to section 3.0, and public comments.
Ms. Santello?
Good evening, President Margell, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, and Ms. Curry. This evening, the comments received are as follows. One student in-person comment for general topic. No online videos were received from students. 10 in-person non-student comments in the preliminary or final section. 2 online video comments were received, general topics. 1 online video comment was received specific to item 6.01, and 1 written comment was received, and you have that copy there at the dais.
Yes, thank you very much. Katie Lance.
All right. Good evening, board members and members of the community. My name is Katie Lance. I'm the ASB Club Coordinator for Kentwood, and I am also a Running Start student. Tonight, I wanted to bring up the issue of student representatives. Austin Freeman. He was the last student representative this board had, and that was back in 2019. We need student representatives back on the board, and I believe more than one is necessary. Students at schools across the district have no idea what the board is doing. Students have concerns that must be heard, and they are not. We have reservations about speaking to our teachers, to our admin, and members of this board in fear of judgment and lack of action. Students are continually disappointed. I am continually disappointed. Board policy number 1250 states there are to be 2 student representatives to serve as non-voting members of the board, adopted in 2018. Since Austin, there has not been another student representative. The school board, as a result, is lacking a direct student perspective, and the only voice we have is through public comment. Student representatives are advocates for students across the district, and the lack is putting us at a disadvantage. Not only am I asking the board to look into reintroducing student representatives, but I'm asking for the board to look into creating a junior school board. I'm currently chair of Covington Youth Council, and I have seen firsthand how involvement in our community has helped youth voices to be heard. We had our joint meeting last night with the Covington City Council and had a productive conversation about action we would like to be seen taken by this board. Adopting a junior school board would help inclusion and advocating for our youth who you claim to work for. Having members on this junior school board from all 4 high schools, as well as Kent Laboratory Academy and Kent Virtual Academy, would broaden outreach to all schools and help with student perspective. I look forward to seeing further action following Policy 1250 by this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Our next speaker, so that is all of our students, speakers have put in comments, so now we are moving to our adult comments. And the first one I have is Dr. Avery Batts.
Good evening, board members, Superintendent Vela, and Ms. Curry. Hello, I'm Dr. Avery Batts, proud principal at Martin Tertune Elementary School and the parent of 2 KSD students. I stand today to actually bring a little positivity to these meetings that have been contentious over the past couple of sessions. Every day as the principal, I have the privilege to lead 461 brilliant Mountaineers, 76 dedicated and terrific staff members, and I can assure you that each of them bring their very best to our school community. They demonstrate perseverance, enthusiasm, achievement, and kindness, and they give their very best to our school community. In fact, we call this peak performance at Martin Tertune. Our school focuses on teaching and learning, trying innovative things, building culture and climate, and just trying to be decent human beings for our beloved community. Sure, we are not perfect, but we realize that every day is training day at Martin Tertune, and every moment counts. Each day I lead morning meeting with our whole school and staff, and every day we talk about our 3 Bs: be kind, be safe, and be our best. As principal and as a parent of 2 KSD students, I ask that you please work through these tough issues throughout the night by incorporating these 3 Bs to get your version of peak performance. And please do not forget that no matter what happens tonight, our students will be coming to school tomorrow with high hopes, big dreams, and we will be there to support each and every one of them. I ask that you join us in being kind to each other and yourselves. Join us in being safe and inclusive with your language and actions, and join us in being your very best for our community. We are ready for you. Please join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next comment is from Barbara Arnett.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Barbara Arnett. I'm a speech therapist at Kent Meridian High School and also serving at iGrad this year. I'm very concerned about the decision to move iGrad from its current location to a smaller location without including staff and students in the process. I have no complaint about the desire to find a new location for iGrad, but what I do object to is choosing a space that cannot hold the current student body, will lead to a reduction in both current and future students served, and to make this decision without genuinely having a dialogue with those impacted. I was there the day people began finding out what had already been decided, and let me tell you, it wasn't a day that made any of us feel like valued employees in this district. I've been a speech therapist working with children with disabilities for the last 13 years, but in my year of working at Kent Meridian as well as iGrad, I've met a group of students who are the most passionate, insightful, caring, tenacious, and yes, sometimes frustrating group of young adults I have ever known. But they're also the most impacted that I've known in this 13 years. They want to succeed. They want to become functional citizens who participate in their community. They want to support their families and themselves. And they want to access the free and appropriate public education that is provided for them in our laws. And they want to receive that in a way that works for them. They have been impacted by so much. The pandemic shutdown, the increase in mental health disorders that we are seeing, pressures to help support their family, and which can sometimes take precedence over their schooling, and so many more. And for my students, especially those with disabilities, the traditional system is failing them. They get behind and there aren't enough supports and they lose hope. They are drowning often in a traditional high school, and some are moments away from dropping out. I work with these kids every single day in both locations. School should not be one size fits all, and my students prove to me every day that with the proper supports and accommodations, they not only can, but they will succeed. Every student at iGrad that I've worked with is unique and has their own story. I want to share with you some illustrations of students that they might be. These are not their real names or their real stories entirely, but they are an illustration of who we work with. I want you to imagine Diana, a student with panic attacks who is under mental health treatment, but unable to successfully cope in a full classroom of her peers. Jose, a student who found his best friend dead from an overdose in his living room and suffers from PTSD now, which means he can't always follow the rigid schedule required at school. He needs that flexibility of working when his brain's allowing him to. Alex, a transgender student or non-binary student who doesn't feel safe in a building of 2,000 students, but can thrive in a smaller setting that gives them more control.
I do ask that you don't use students' names specifically identifying them.
They are not real names. I made them up.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
It was an illustration, and I changed details as well, but they are
Okay.
illustrative.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Sam, a single parent who needs to work during the day, take care of their baby in the afternoon, and study late at night. Just saying the mainline high schools should be able to do better and serve these students isn't enough. We need alternate options for these students who the norm doesn't work for. iGrad is working, iGrad is serving these students, and please don't break an amazing thing that the Kent School District has that should be a role model for all of the districts around us.
Okay, I do need to ask you
Please find us a space that will work for us and let us continue working with those students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you when it was, and so I wanted to give you a little extra time on that one. Thank you. Our next comment is from Karen DeBruler.
Good evening, President Margell, board members, Superintendent Vela, and Mrs. Curry. I know most of you. I've sat in those seats for most of 10 years, so I know the routine here. My name is Karen DeBruler. I live in the Fairwood area of the district. I'm here to support the levy. I'm a retired educator, having taught for 33 years in 4 different districts. I was a union member all 33 years. Renton, REA, Derringer, DEA, Sumner, SEA, and Issaquah, IEA. I am a retired school board member. I'm a property owner and a grandma of 2 KSD elementary students. I have voted in favor of every bond and levy that ran wherever I lived, whether I lived in the district or not. If I was living in a district where I wasn't teaching, I still supported their levies and their bonds. I know what the difference can be from the classroom and from sitting up there at the board. I know what difference it can make if you have or don't have those levy dollars. I don't understand why educators and parents wouldn't vote for levy. It directly impacts the working conditions of the teachers. It directly impacts the students' work and their opportunities. It directly affects the health and safety of the buildings. Also, property owners, moi, have the effect of losing the value of your property. If the school district goes down, if it doesn't float its boat like it can, as best it can, the property values go down. As a homeowner, I do maintenance on my house. In just the last 6 months, I had to replace several leaky windows, add a surge protector to my furnace, and completely replace the electrical circuit box. I have only one building. KSD has 43 buildings along with multiple facilities that need upkeep. I also had to buy a new phone technology. That's what the district is facing, but on multiple levels. So as a property owner, I want the school district to maintain the most current level of technology and upkeep. It reflects on the value, as I said, of my property. So I'm urging voters to support our school district by voting for the April 23rd levy. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Our next comment is from Deborah Strauss.
Good evening, Madam President and members of the board. I am Deborah Strauss, and I am a proud parent of 5 KSD graduates and a past board member of 12 years on the board. And I found myself earlier today when you were calling roll call and voting, it was hard to not raise my hand. But I am here first to say thank you for the amount of effort that you put into the information and things for the levies that we're putting out to vote on April 23rd. I know the amount of effort and the work that it takes, and it's not just what you see, it's all the things that you had to go through to get to that, to have those things come forward. And as Karen so eloquently put, our levies are so important to our district. We have to have these to be able to maintain our buildings and our technology. I've sat on the board where we've had to make millions and millions of dollars of cuts, and it is not a good place to be. Our levies allow us to continue some of our programs that help our students, as well as to keep our buildings at top level, which increases the safety and the ability for our students to learn. So I'm also here to say in favor of the levy and want to encourage my fellow citizens of Kent School District community to also vote in favor of the levy. Thank you again for all you do.
Thank you, Deborah. Our next comment is from Allison Johnson.
Good evening, School Board Directors, President Miguel, Superintendent Vela, and Ms. Curry. My name is Allison Johnson. I am a community volunteer, past KSD employee, and a homeowner within Kent School District, and a voter, and one that has voted for every bond and levy in the last 39 years. I want to start by thanking the school board and the KSD administration for all that you do every day. I know some people may not appreciate what you do, but I do. I would like to ask the community, and especially the voters, to please vote yes for the upcoming capital projects and technology replacement levy. As Karen and Debbie have said, it takes money to maintain these buildings and schools. I would also like to invite the community to attend the Citizens for Kent Schools rally on March 30th at Kent Commons between 11 and 1. This would be a great place to ask questions that you may have about the levy. There will be people there ready to answer your questions. I was listening to the last board meeting online due to another meeting that I had to attend. I was disappointed by the disrespect that was shown to our school board members by parents, union members, past school board members, etc. I would remind adults to please remember what elementary schools are teaching. Be kind. That meeting reminds me of a first grade class that is unruly. Please remember, kids are watching. Adults, we can do better. I have heard through the grapevine that several adults, aka voters, are not voting yes for the levy. I do worry about that, as the ones who will be hurt by a failed levy is the students and staff and our community home values. As I mentioned in the February 14th school board meeting, when a levy or bond fails, it takes about 10 years for the community to improve, or in other words, recoup. Thank you for all you do and for your time.
Thank you. Our next comment is from Christy Ackerman.
Hi, I'm Christy Ackerman, community member, parent of a Kentwood grad, and a multilingual Mill Creek teacher. 1 month ago, Mill Creek students, staff, and community members spoke at the board meeting in support of the multilingual department and dual language programs. The Kent School District's multilingual program, which in September 2023 served 1,103 students and now in February 2024 serves 7,895 students. A program that receives federal funds in excess of $18 million and in the new organizational chart doesn't even exist. No mention of multilingual or dual language programs. We talked about the irreplaceable educational experience a student had in the dual language program, and we expressed our concern about the program's futures due to cuts. In response, Director Farah made the following comment. We've had emotional testimonies indicating that KSD is going away with the dual language program. We're going through changes, but that does not mean that we're going to completely do away with dual language, because our diversity is our strength. I would like to clarify, we were not under the impression that dual language program would be cut or immediately cease to exist. Instead, we were confused and distraught, given the federal civil right for multilingual education, existing issues within the dual language program, Washington's current political climate, and KSD's own strategic goals. Why would the district choose to remove the multilingual director and assistant director positions? In the past 2 years, we've had a director of multilingual education, and our dual language program has moved in the right direction. Enrollment and student retention increase every year. However, issues persist to threaten the integrity of the program. Transportation remains unclear for our Scenic Hill community. Students coming from Carriage Crest boundaries, transportation, resources, and recruitment and district providing staff lag behind the ever-increasing student enrollment numbers. Many students in dual language are my multilingual students who are brand new to the United States. They are able to continue to access grade-level content in Spanish while simultaneously developing their skills in English language proficiency. These are some of our most vulnerable students, and this program is not well established enough to run functionally without a director. As of today, 313 House Bill 1228 sits on Governor Inslee's desk. It aims to provide permanent funding for DL programs in Washington state school districts by 2040. KSD has the opportunity to be on the cutting edge of multilingual education, a role model for the rest of the state. So how can we be the most diverse district in the state and not have representation on the district administrative organizational chart for our multilingual and dual language programs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next comment, Duncan McManus.
Board, my name is Duncan McManus. I'm a resident and I'm a parent of a student in the district. I'm going to try not to yell this time. I get it. See, last time I was frustrated because I felt like this group of adults wasn't able to work together, and I felt that if I raised my voice, it would shake you out of whatever shenanigans that you were working on that would somehow prevent you from performing your duties. But I do get it now. See, it was 1669 last time we met. One of your directors pointed out the resolution was not only exclusatory, but also covers actions that the board has made in the past. And I thought, oh, I get it. They're covering themselves. I see. So instead of successfully preparing all students for their futures, we are doing this ridiculous backtracking to cover the previous ineptitudes of this board. Thing is, it was another director that kept throwing you lifeline after lifeline after lifeline, offering to table the discussion and take it to executive session. I turned to my wife and I said, this is how they're going to do it. This is how they're going to do it. They're going to take it to executive session, duke it out however they want to do it, and then bring us back a product that they were going to ramrod down our throats. Now, that's not exactly how it went down. How it went down was this board chose, by a vote of 3-2, to do all of these actions directly in front of you. Did you all get the message on that? Your dissent is pointless. The lack of support and resources on a daily basis are irrelevant because this board is too busy pulling its pants up. This district is in crisis. And when we look to you, we see infighting, we see backstabbing, and we see collusion. Should we have trouble getting students back into the classroom in September, I will hold this board responsible for the deplorable and exclusionary actions that they chose to take in front of the very people that they will be negotiating with. Honestly, guys, I hope you got what you needed out of 1669, because I don't think either of us knows what the actual cost is going to be. Also, If at any time any director is compelled to fold their arms and say, "I'm done," leave this room. This room is not for people who are done. This room is for people who have more, and if you don't have more, you need to get out of the way. This petulant childishness is disrespectful not only to your other board members, but to every single person in this room that does not have the luxury of being able to proclaim themselves done. Any red shirt in this room, when was the last time you had the luxury of folding your arms and saying, "I'm done"? This board could start showing the same respect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Duncan. Our next comment is from Ron DeLay.
Good evening. Last time I was here was on the famous board meeting that was just referred to. I talked about learning, rather interestingly, that iGrad was going to be moved. There was no contact with any stakeholders on this. If we had been any of the other high schools, you would have 1,000 or more ballistic parents, teachers, administrators, and so on going, "What? You don't make decisions like these and not include your stakeholders? What are you thinking? Come on, that's not okay." And then we're told that the decision has been made, no discussion. It's not 1950. We don't do that anymore. That's inappropriate and unacceptable. I work at iGrad. I'm one of the stakeholders. I have property in the district, and we're having discussions about supporting bonds and stuff like that. Why would anyone who's treated this way want to support any bond? Come on, folks. That is unacceptable. You need to change that, and you need to turn it around. Next thing. We're the only school in the district, iGrad, that's growing. And yet there's discussion. We're told that we're going to have the little green building on Kent Kangley, which, by the way, we're not afraid to give up a strip mall that we've been in for a number of years, as endearing as that property is, if we have a better place and we have a larger place. Now, we're told that we'll use the strip mall, but it's going to diminish us by 50%. And the kids that are not going to go there, they're going to go back to their regular high schools, and they're going to have a special intensive program. Seriously? How many of you have dealt with alternative school students? You certainly haven't talked to any of the experts in the field, clearly. And you also have the deal that to save $200,000, you're going to lose probably $3 million a year, because we generate and can generate a lot. Okay. Current little green building, add 2 portables, and you have what we need. Make it nice for these kids, and think of the kids. Don't think of the fact that, well, if we have more kids, in iGrad, it'll make us look bad. iGrad makes us look good. What we're doing, actually, is a remarkable kind of thing for these kids that have no other choices. Seriously. And finally, I would say, okay, there we go. Yeah, finally, I would say no more, other than, again, I said last time, do your homework, folks, and turn this around. I'm 75 years old. And I'm not going to be told I can't speak or no discussion. I will discuss, and I will continue coming to these meetings.
Thank you, Ron. Our last speaker we have enough time for, Jill DeLaurenti.
Good evening, Board. My name is Jill DeLaurenti, and I've worked as an office professional here in the Kent School District for the last 16 years. I stumbled across the board mission statement and felt compelled to comment tonight. It reads, Increasing academic achievement and accountability for every student is the primary goal of the school board and the district. I was lucky enough to start my career at Kent Phoenix Academy in the March of 2008, its initial year. The idea behind the Kent Phoenix Academy was to bring a choice to non-traditional high school learners. We were designed to increase academic achievement, accountability for a pool of students that needed extra support, extra care, maybe an extra set of eyes, many of which would have given up on their high school education altogether. KPA had a different approach to their learning. We had programs and opportunities that weren't offered at the Boundary High Schools, including the district's first virtual high school. iGrad opened shortly after Kent Phoenix Academy, and it was also a new opportunity for students needing a solution. Their partnership with Green River College, their rolling enrollment and credit acquisition opportunities were a second chance for struggling students to get to the finish line. We've all heard the presentations and testimonies of support and the successes the program has brought to the district and its students over the years. KPA and iGrad together shared many students. If a student wasn't successful in one program, they had another option. Well, KPA is no longer in operation. The district quietly merged KPA with Kent Mountain View Academy, dismantling most of its programming, most of its outside supports, and many of its students. It was presented to the public as a new building being constructed to house both schools. It resulted in the creation of the Kent Lab Academy. Not to take away from the Kent Lab Academy, it's a great program, and it's had many successes. But it is the leftover product of 2 school closures, not the addition of a new Kent building. Kent Lab program has a much smaller capacity than the 2 individual schools, and it's for grade ranges 3rd through 12th graders. Less students, more grade levels equals fewer opportunities for high school students in need of support. I was so disheartened to hear at the last board meeting that again, the district is merging programs for non-traditional learners into one building with iGrad and Kent Virtual Academy. The building is much smaller in size than the existing leased iGrad building. The district purchased the property quietly and relinquished the lease on the existing iGrad building. You have again moved forward with reducing options for our struggling learners by significantly lowering the enrollment capacity. With less opportunity for non-traditional learners, students in need, the lapsing grace of the COVID graduation waivers, be prepared for Kent School District graduation rates to drop in the coming years. Remember, you're here to serve every student, not just the easy ones.
Thank you, Jill. We are now moving on to section 4.0, Superintendent Report, and I ask Superintendent Vela to take it.
Thank you, President Margell. As springtime approaches, we enter an annual period of change, growth, planning, and preparation for our future. This is a time of year when we begin living in both the current school year and planning for the next school year, while working together and never losing sight of why we are here, to support the academic and social well-being of each and every student in our district. As we plan for the new school year and begin the budget development process, we continue to monitor our financial situation. We will take appropriate steps as needed to maintain fiscal stability for our students' futures. We are meeting with our school principals throughout this process to allocate and align resources to best serve the needs of our students and remain committed to providing a world-class education in every classroom across our district. Also, part of the planning is the upcoming levy election on April 23rd. This capital projects and technology replacement levy funds health and safety, improvements to technology access, modernized infrastructure, teaching and learning tools, along with teacher and staff development. I encourage you to be an informed voter by learning about this levy, why it is needed to support students. Find more information and details on ksdlevy.org. Springtime in our district is also about celebrations. This includes recognizing our exceptional educational support professionals. From our coaches on the field leading athletics, to our paraeducators supporting learning in our schools, to our office professionals that keep our schools running smoothly, to the nutrition services team for providing meals, to our custodial, grounds, maintenance, and capital planning teams for keeping our facilities maintained, to our information technology professionals for keeping us connected, and to our safety services team for keeping us safe. Finally, to our transportation team for their service and efforts to ensure students are picked up and arrive at school on time. Recently, 6 office personnel drove buses to provide coverage when there were several absences in our driver pool. I am grateful for these dedicated professionals and their continuing focus on our students. March is also Music in Our Schools Month, and I celebrate and honor the importance that music has in our lives and how it can play a vital role in student learning. I myself remember learning to play the alto saxophone and how it instilled in me a love of music to this very day. I recall my music teacher, Mr. Herm Danielson, and the impact that they had on my educational journey. Our music teachers are encouraging and inspiring students every day, and I thank them for bringing music to our schools, and more importantly, to our students. In the Kent School District, our first goal is to prepare students to be college and career ready. To achieve this goal, we center our work on the teaching and learning process, along with continuous improvement. A strong continuous improvement cycle includes a comprehensive assessment system and progress monitoring of student growth and achievement for foundational literacy and numeracy. I am proud to announce that since the beginning of this school year, kindergarten through 5th grade students reading at or above grade level increased by 12%, and elementary math scores have increased by 15%. I commend our students for their work and our dedicated teachers and staff for their efforts to provide a high-quality education. On March 21st, we recognize the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. We as a district celebrate the rich diversity of our community with equity as our core value. This means that all students have equal access to quality staff, courses, activities, services, and resources based on their individual needs. We will continue to identify and correct practices and policies that perpetuate both racial discrimination and institutional bias. I remain committed to partnering with our school board and transforming educational outcomes for students by leading with equity and ensuring students have every opportunity to achieve their desired outcomes, both in the classroom and in life. Thank you, and this concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent Vela. Okay, we are now moving on to our legislative update. This is also when our public comments close. So if there's anybody racing over to get a last name in the bucket, oh, there is, see? I'm gonna talk really slowly just for you, Tim. Okay, so 5.01, Director Clark, if you'll lead us for the legislative update.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a gentle reminder, this is a supplemental year, which means the major budget is in the even-numbered years, and then they try to catch up with their clear shortcomings in terms of delivery of service for a 2-year period. So you're seeing the cleanup act is what you're actually seeing. Now, they adjourned here last week, and so we do have some pictures of some of the things. For the state, they did come up with an additional $2.14 billion. Much of that, of course, was improving revenue flow into the state. For K through 12, there was an additional $525 million allocated. But unfortunately, K through 12 spending for 2023 was 43% of the budget. For 2024, it decreased to 43.4%. and only 5 years ago, it had been 52%. So they're dealing with other things. Among the bits and pieces that we did see actually make some adjustments, you've heard me talk about the prototypical school model where they required all these subjects and services to be made, but they didn't fully fund it, and that's what that McCleary action was all about. And guess what? They're still not fully funding it. But they did come forward with another 71 million of very specifically targeted. About the only money we'll see is there's some relief in salaries for office staff. MSOC, so materials, supplies, and operating costs. There was an additional 43 million, but you spread that through 296 school districts and it doesn't go far. I did ask an interesting question. I kept saying all the urban school districts all have these one-to-one lab technology acquisitions that we use for student learning. And if they're all doing it and digital education is fundamental to what we're doing, then why wouldn't the state say that's part of the basic curriculum? And was told that that projected cost would all go into MSOC in their particular budget, which is another way of saying not likely. It was supposed to be adjusted to inflation, but unfortunately, while the inflation rate was 2.1, it went down to 1.9 of what they actually acquired for us. We did end up with going up from $1,482 per student to $1,504 per student. And all of this gets piecemealed down into all these little categories. The one that struck me was they run a bunch of grants and specify the school districts where they'll go. So there were 5 school districts that got additional funding to create student health centers, which is certainly in massive need throughout the state. But the largest school district that got any of that money was Franklin Pierce, and I think they only have 2 high schools. So, and then I did make note in the fine print, they did send to the OSPI $35,000 for a Spanish civics education textbook. So some of you in elementary that are looking at that, you might at least make an inquiry of what they produced. There also was an interesting $30,000 grant for looking at Chinese American cultural education, and I'm kind of curious what that will end up looking like. And speaking of OSPI, they got a big chunk of money, and they can't tell you where all that's going yet because it all has to be run through that grill that says, these are the standards, this is the rule coming from the state, and so forth. All right, special ed funding, the cap in 2023 originally went from 13.7 to 15%. In 2024, it went to 16%, or an additional 19 million, or putting it in an entirely different category, we'll get very little. I remind you that what we were fighting for was a 17.5 cap that would start to actually reflect what we spend. And in this district, we spend significantly more in terms of transportation, innovative technology, and so forth. And, well, anyway. All right, the state auditor, one other oddball thing. I do want to credit State Senator Claudia Kaufman in the 47th District that services us. She did, in fact, get a joint resolution that was sent off to Congress, and I find it instructive. What she said in the resolution was, special ed funding and law comes from the Fed for the most part. There's a supplemental budget, obviously, from the state. But the trap is, in that law, it says the federal government will supply, with all these demands, 40% of the funding. Has not happened yet. And so obviously this, if it comes from every state in the union, is just a reminder, you ask us to do these things, but you don't give us the money. All right, the state auditor did get $800,000 for audit of each school district with a report to come to the legislature in November 2025. Now you'll notice that was in the special ed category. So they're trying to track money and guarantee that it's delivering the services that it's supposed to. They did, fortunately, finally put in another $5 million for inclusionary practices in terms of adjustments to classroom, but again, we'll see hardly anything. Pupil transportation to OSPI, there was an additional 76 million for unusual needs, and there are a large number of school districts, particularly the smaller rural ones, that have a real significant need of assistance just trying to get their kids to school. So once again, we won't see much of that. There was an additional $425,000 to aid bus drivers, and once again, we'll see very little of that. The supplemental capital budget for 2024. Now, here's one oddity that I want you to file in the back of your mind. You know that we created, the state legislature created a new tax on the sale of stocks and bonds. That brought in just shy of $400 million this year. Now, the significance of that is, when I say that amount, $400 million that went into school transportation as an offset of where that money is supposed to go. We'll see a little bit of that. The capital budget, you'll recall, is simply buildings and materials. And so they did enlarge that expenditure on it, but of course, if you just take inflation, you know that whatever you were previously doing in buildings, the cost has gone up significantly. And so just to get what you had last year, you have to put more money into it. And, the K through 12 in the capital budget will get an additional $40 million. And then there's an additional $6 million for health and safety, which will actually end up going to OSPI, and then that comes out in emergency repair grants. So they're paying attention to it. They recognize the trying to support the classroom teachers in terms of dealing with the social, emotional issues that we face. They have brought some more money into that category. It's not nearly what it needs to be, and we're doing the best we can. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I want to say thank you after. We're not going to see much of that, but it is what it is. Yeah. Okay, I am reminded by the superintendent that we did have a comment that is specifically for an agenda item, and it's about our consent agenda item. So, and I believe it was 6.01?
Correct.
Okay, so we are pulling 6.01.
I believe we can simply hear the video and then move into consent.
Okay. Great.
Good evening, board members. My name is Joe Riley, and I'll be speaking tonight about agenda item 6.01, Lake Youngs Elementary School roof replacement additional funding. This agenda item represents a 26% increase in the project's budget, which may or may not be reasonable given construction costs over the last 8 years. However, the district has provided no information supporting this increase in cost. They state that co-op pricing is over budget, meaning they must have a cost estimate somewhere, yet it is not presented within the agenda item. They also mention they've implemented strategies to increase cost effectiveness of the scope, but don't mention any details about what those strategies are. Are we cutting corners? And if so, why? If you want an example of how you aren't being transparent, this is it. But my concerns go beyond this specific project. If you recall, back in March 2023, the board reallocated $5.6 million for property purchases. and this roof replacement was one of the reallocated projects. At the time, the district stated that these projects would instead be funded through the 2018 capital levy, but there was no explanation for which projects from the levy would be impacted by the sudden $5.6 million loss. Last month, when the district moved $2.5 million of that money back to the 2016 bond, there was again no mention of which projects would now be able to be completed with that money now being freed up. Millions of dollars are flying back and forth for capital projects, and apparently none of it has any impact on anything. This $315,000 ask is the same, with no stated impact to any other project due to the increased cost. A couple weeks ago, the board repeatedly highlighted its fiduciary responsibility and that it would be inappropriate to pay for a board member's legal expenses. Yet the district spent over $970,000 on outside legal expenses in 2023 alone. They are requesting $315,000 with no supporting evidence for why it's needed, and the board can reallocate millions of dollars without any explanation as to the impact of that decision. I don't understand why fiduciary responsibility is deemed important in one context and not in another, but I do know that you will not gain much support for a levy that is desperately needed if you continue this behavior. If you are going to reallocate this money, you need to know why it's needed and what the impact of that reallocation is. How much money is remaining in the 2016 bond fund balance? How many bond projects have been or will be funded through the 2018 capital levy? If the district cannot provide you this information tonight in public, then you should table this item until they can. You all wanted to be board directors. You've all become board directors. Now do your jobs as board directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antello.
Thank you very much. There are no other public comments on any of the consent agenda items. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, if I could pull 610.
Is there any other consent items that would like to be pulled?
I'd like to pull 6.01 through 6.04.
6.01 through 6.04?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other items that need to be pulled?
Can you just remind me what the two added ones were again?
Oh,
The 6.12 and 1.3. What were those again?
Those two are two field trips.
That's what that was. Okay, that's all I needed.
Sure.
Oh.
Okay. So
Madam
we've
Chair, I move approval of the consent agenda items 605 through 613 minus 610.
Is there a second?
second.
Seeing that the motion has been made for items 6.05 through 6.13, with exception of 6.10, is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'm sorry, Director Song, was that an aye?
Sorry, aye.
Great. Seeing that's 5-0, the motion passes. Is there a motion for item 6.01?
I move approval of 601 Lake Young's Elementary School roof repair additional funding.
Second.
Seeing that's been a motion and seconded, we move to discussion.
Yeah, so I kind of had a similar question to what he had when he spoke there. As far as the allocation that we have for the funding from the previous bond, like he said, how much of that is left at this point?
Mr. Baylor?
Oh, thank you. I'd like to call Mr. Dave Buzzard and Mr. Brett to come up to the podium.
President Margell, members of the board, Superintendent Villa, Ms. Curry. As far as the exact amount goes of the 2016 bond, is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. So to give you an accurate amount, I want to try to explain. If I were to give you a number today, that number would have to be inclusive of everything that has been paid out to date for every single project, the current encumbrances of everything that still needs to be paid for projects that are in design or still being processed, and then it would also have to include whatever those budget amounts are from the budget that was done in 2015 for the 2016 bond. At this point in time, I can get you those. At this point in time, I would rather not give you those numbers because I don't want to give you something that's inaccurate. What I will tell you is that on March 27th, there's a work session, and we will be giving a capital planning and capital projects update. We will bring all of that information to the board and to the public.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a further question? From our 2016 bond of the projects that we had specified that we were going to do, which of those projects will we be completing?
One more time.
Of the projects that were specified on our 2016 bond, what will we be completing of those projects?
100% of them.
Thank you.
And if I can, Larry, can you explain how we got the best price for this particular item in this particular year?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Brett Scribner. He's our Assistant Director of Capital Projects. Before he starts, I want to let you know Brett's been with the district for about 8 years. He was our district roofer for 5 years prior to coming to the Capital Projects team. So Brett, take it away.
Yes, President Margell, Vice President Farah, Director Clark, Director Cook, and Director Song, Superintendent Vela, and Ms. Curry. It's a pleasure to stand up here to answer any additional questions you might have about the Lake Young's roof. As far as getting the price, we often go through a cooperative, which allows us to get state pricing with contractors that are approved to do the work. This particular cooperative that we went through actually competitively bids the project under their umbrella with contractors that are approved to perform the work. So we did have 5 bidders come out, and we did in turn get the lowest number of those 5 bids.
And in this particular co-op, all those people listed as available to bid on the job are proven as having delivered many years of past projects below cost.
I don't know about below cost,
Yeah.
but in this particular cooperative, they hold a list of contractors that are eligible to bid on the projects that all have been vetted for capability of performing the work.
If the project scope for this was established in 2016 with that bond with the $1.1 million figure, why now? Why didn't we do this project when we had that estimated rate in either 2017, 18, or 19?
I actually cannot answer that at the moment, but I came on board in 2019, and we had a list of projects to do, and there was actually a predetermined set schedule for those projects, and this is just one of the projects that was at the end of the list.
I just assume the list I've seen is on that big paper, and it was many pages, and I couldn't even tell you how many different items there were, but we just can't do them all at once. I mean, that's why the projects are spanned out of time, and we also have done many of them in-house. Could you speak of that and some of the pricing that we end up doing with those projects?
Yeah, since I wanted Brett to speak to the roofing project. So Director Song, I want to go back to you. So the Lake Young's roof, even though it was on the 2016 bond, it still had some life in it. And there were other priority projects that come up prior to that. So again, you know, the Fred Long, who was the predecessor before me, he put out that bond schedule for dates and priority. When I took it over, we took a look at it, and when Brett came on board, we keep revising that all the time because things do take priority. So that roof still had life in it, and that's why we thought we could even push it to the past the bond timeline, and we could put that into the levy if we have to. Priority is a huge component of what we do in our team and what Brett does in his team. Even things that are forward-facing in the district right now from our website, Those dates may change if something critical has to be pushed up on top, including bond projects that might be on there saying we're going to do this year. If a critical component of something fails, or we find a better pricing for it, or any type of avenue to save the district and the community and the taxpayers' money, we take that opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing there's none, and there's a motion on the floor for approval of item 6.0, I'm sorry, 6.
Oh, I had one other question, sorry. Sorry to jump in there. I just was wondering, is it going to cover all of the roofs? Like, I have been out there a couple times, and it's not just one building.
Yes, actually, we do have, we will be getting the library roof replaced, which is a composite shingle. We'll be getting the torch down flat roofs replaced, which are the ones that are in need of replacement at this time. And that's going to cover the entire main building and the breezeway going down towards the gym and the gym itself. The roof on the multipurpose room was built in 2020, and there's a metal roof on the annex building right now, which is still in good condition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Thanks.
Good. Okay, seeing that there's a motion on the floor for 6.01 Lake Young's Elementary School roof replacement additional funding, and it has been seconded. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye.
5-0, the motion passes. Is there a motion for 6.02?
Move approval 602 Managed Internet Broadband Services Award of contract to Ednetics.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. The motion has been made and seconded. Open for discussion.
I was wondering if we could discuss this a little bit. I just wanted to see what the pricing was and how we ended up coming to Ednetics.
So question is pricing and how we ended up with the Ednetics. I'd like to call Dr. Behringer, Deputy Superintendent, to the podium.
President Margell, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, Ms. Curry. Appreciate the question. And I want to invite somebody up to the podium here that could potentially ask questions for the next 3 items that you may have questions about, considering they're all technology-based. Unfortunately, this evening, our Director of Technology, Kyle Olson's home sick, but we have his Assistant Director of Technology Operations, Mr. Ed McAlpine, who is definitely capable of answering your questions. So,
thank you.
Ed?
President Margell, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, Ms. Curry. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond to questions, and if you would be kind enough to please restate the question.
So I was just curious as to how we came up with Ednetics and what the pricing was difference, if they came under bid by quite a bit, or if it was just a little bit, or how we got to that amount.
Sure. So, Director Cook, this managed, managed internet broadband services contract was done through the E-rate funding program, a federal funding program that hopefully some or all of you are aware of, as it helps fund educational technologies, particularly broadband internet to the classrooms. This is seen as important enough services by the federal government through the E-rate program to provide funding to manage all of the end-to-end equipment and services involved with providing those broadband services. Because it's a federal program, needless to say, there are extensive procurement guidelines. So this went out through not only public RFP, but specifically through the E-rate program with the corresponding filings with the federal government, Form 470, which maybe you may or may not be aware of. Bids were obviously solicited through that RFP process. The RFP was open, minimum of 28 days per E-rate program guidelines. And as it turns out, Ednetics was the one and only bid that was received in this case.
I see. It looks like the total cost is $156,000 for 3 years. And the district is going to end up paying, after E-rate discount, $31,362 of that. So I appreciate your guys' diligent work in making sure that we get that funding, because that is very important.
Yes, it definitely, the E-rate funding program enables us to do a lot more for our schools, for our students, to support learning than we can do on our own.
Yeah. And I know it's not an easy process. It takes quite a bit of time and a lot of effort.
Indeed.
All right, that's all the questions I had for that one.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing no other discussion, we have a motion on the floor for item number 6.02, manage internal broadband services award of contract to Ednetics. All those in favor, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Is there a motion for item number 6.03?
Move approval of 603, added internet capacity award of contract to King County INET.
Is there a second?
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. It's open for discussion.
So I just wanted to go over this one as well, just because it's a similar idea, but it's a little bit different setup here. So we have three different things that we're voting on here. We've got the Managed Internal Broadband Services Award, the Added Internet Capacity, and the Fiber Wide Area Network Award. Can you explain a little bit about why we have three different ones?
Sure. This one that we're talking about right now, the added internet capacity, is very different and distinct from managed internal broadband. Managed internal broadband is actually monitoring and management of both the network gear and the services for the internet and other internal network traffic. This one here, added internet capacity, is literally for one of our two internet circuits used by the district to support both instruction and operations. So we have currently a internet service provider through the state known as K20, and supplemental internet service has been needed, particularly since COVID, which is currently delivered through King County. And that supplemental internet services contract is coming to an end. Currently all under, again, E-rate funding.
Yeah, it looks like the bid came to $180,000 from INET and $150 from Lumen. Why did we go with King County INET instead of Lumen, considering the price difference?
Yes, right, exactly, because normally we certainly would be choosing the most cost-effective solution. In this particular case, and this was bore out in the details, the requirements in the RFP and in corresponding E-rate filings, that we were looking for a solution that not only replaced the existing service, but enhanced it both in bandwidth and resiliency. Unfortunately, the service offering that came in from Lumen was not a resilient service offering. In fact, without getting into too many technical weeds, there were two occasions earlier this winter and late fall where fiber lines in our region were cut. I can't tell you why they were cut, but big 50-foot sections were cut, causing outages not only to our internet service, but also the WAN circuits for many of our schools. Needless to say, that's just more than a little disruptive to instruction, not to mention district operations.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable thing to do, considering the difficulty I think everyone had during that period. As far as that goes, though, I'm glad to see that the amount that we'll be paying over the life of the contract is only $36,000, not the full $180,000. Again, using the E-rate funding that you were able to get from the federal government.
And again, I appreciate the fact that this board recognizes the value of that program.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That's all I had as far as.
Just a quick question. We're going to 10 gig. What is our current pipe circuit size? Do you know?
Our current ISP circuit from King County INET is 7 gig. And again, I would point out that this is not only an increase in speed, but also change in the resiliency of that service.
Thank you.
Were we finding that we were getting to capacity with the 7 gigs?
Indeed.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Definitely a key metric on both the internet circuits as well as, I know some of you have a technical background on our WAN circuits as well. And hence, part of, it's not the only reason, but part of the drive for this change. Keep in mind, existing contracts are through E-rate currently, and they are coming to an end. So we have to go back out for RFP for continuity of services.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing no other discussion, a motion has been made for approval of 6.03, added internet capacity award of contract to King County INET. All those in favor, please raise your right hand and said aye.
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 Aye. The motion passes 5-0. Is there a motion for 6.04?
I move approval of 604 Fiber Wide Area Network Award of contract to King County INET.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. It's open for discussion.
So I guess the same sort of question. So we also have the Fiber Wide Area Network Award that's also going to King County INET. And what's the reasoning behind us awarding that contract?
To King County INET as opposed to Comcast?
Yeah, or just the reasoning for having this additional contract instead of just the one that we already have.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
So up to this point, we've talked about the management of all the network equipment and services in the MIBS one. We just finished talking about the internet circuit, one of our 2 internet circuits. This one is for the circuits that cross-connect our school buildings and connect them back to the admin center. And I would also point out, just for clarification on this, please note this is only 24 of our school buildings. The City of Kent schools are under a separate contract with Comcast.
Okay.
So to answer your question, interconnectivity between the schools and from the schools back to admin center, because many of our services, including our internet circuits, exist here. So that means student internet traffic has to traverse back to here and then go out the internet.
Yeah, it looks like Comcast came with like a crazy bid, like 3.2 million.
Exactly.
That's what we were giggling over here
We were just
on.
looking at that going 3.
I guess they just
wow.
didn't even want it
I don't
or
think
something,
so.
because the King County INET came with 865.
Yeah.
It's 865,000, that is. So
No,
it's significantly less.
shared a similar reaction during the bid.
They all need a
And just
good
full
laugh
disclosure, I work for Comcast, so that just, I had nothing to do with this contract though. And it looks like the district's portion again is going to be 173,000 over the life of the contract, which is 5 years. Why did we choose 5 years instead of 10?
Couple of particular reasons. The 5-year contract, first of all, I would point out, allows for an option for multiple 5-year extensions. The other reason why we chose it, aside from cost, is I mentioned the fact that this was only 24 of our school buildings. We have the remaining school buildings that are primarily down in the Kent Valley. We call them the City of Kent schools. Yeah. For those of you that are familiar with technology, they're point-to-point dark fiber. That contract will end in roughly 5 years. So we want to have the ability in 5 years, go out to RFP for them all.
All of them, yeah.
And hopefully realize cost savings through that, and maybe even change some of the topology.
Yeah.
And possibly even construction, dependent upon costs,
Yeah,
right?
that's great you're using the foresight to do that, because, that would probably cost us a lot more money if we
I'd
didn't
like to
do
take
this.
credit, but that's Director Earls.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions I had.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, there's a motion on the floor for approval of item 6.04, Fiber Wide Area Network Award of Contract to King County INET. All those in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Is there a motion on the floor?
I do have one question. Just procedurally, with our last meeting that we had, we closed discussion without voting for it, and it wasn't unanimous. I just don't know, is that going to impact anything? Maybe we can ask the parliamentarian or what have you, if that could negate that resolution. I just want to make sure we did everything right.
I'm sorry, we voting to close discussion?
Yeah. If it's not unanimous, you have to actually vote.
To close discussion?
Yes.
I could certainly ask Mr. Brockvogel to come to the podium to help answer that question.
Madam Chair and Board and Superintendent Villa, I heard some of the question. I think I heard that.
Restate it.
That would be great, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so during our last session, we voted on 1669.
Right.
But during discussion, discussion was ended by the president alone, and we did not have unanimous consent. And so normally you would vote for that, and we would have a vote between us to close that out before going into voting for the resolution. And I was just wondering, is that going to impact the legality of 1669 in that case?
I don't believe so, no. There was but what was the flaw? What was the procedural flaw?
We should have voted to end discussion since it wasn't unanimous, but we did not do that.
Oh, in this board, even since you're being on, I don't think I've ever heard a motion to close discussion before voting on it. But the vote itself is valid and durable, unless there's some striking procedural thing that means unfairness to
I think that would be the
voted.
case, though, because that would be unfair to the other side in that situation if we didn't take a vote on it. I'm just saying because the president did it on her own without all of us making a decision one way or the other.
Likely in her board chair role,
Yeah.
if you ask me.
So it's my understanding that each discussion is by acknowledgement of the board chair. And so if we have ended discussion because the board chair is not recognizing any further discussion, then we can move to the motion.
Certainly, there's another way to do it. It's a call to question, and that can be in the middle of somebody's speech. Oftentimes you hear that, it's sort of insulting, but sometimes it's done, and sometimes that's recognized to shut people off, and that certainly was not the case here. So I guess my answer is I don't see any procedural flaw that would negate or rescind the resolution.
I guess the reason I bring it up is because, I had wanted to continue discussing it, and since you ended it, I just wanted to make sure that, if this ended up in court for some reason, the fact that I asked for it to be discussed still, and then it was closed out without a vote of the board, I just am concerned that that's going to end up causing
Yeah, if
some
there's
problems.
something that serious, I would suggest coming and talking to me, and we can do some research. It's probably not the appropriate time for me to just say off the fly, but based on what I'm hearing, I don't see any procedural flaw that would undermine the whole thing.
Thank you, Mr. Buckwell.
Madam Chair, I'd like to go ahead and move 610 gifts, donations.
To approve?
Yep, to
Yes.
approve.
I second.
There's been a motion for item number 6.10, gifts, donations, and memorials acceptance. We are now open for discussion.
So I just want to acknowledge we have some benefactors that are really helping out our individual schools. Meeker Middle School got a equipment award of $1,750 from Pro Laser Engraver and Cutter to enhance student projects for humanities and performing arts classes. And the donor was supported by Meeker Parent Teachers Association. Neely O'Brien got $1,863 worth of, well, really it was school supplies that came from the Seattle Thunderbirds, who, by the way, every year continue to support our schools, particularly on the valley floor. Daniel Elementary got $715 from Bright Light Welding for a climbing wall playset for special needs students. KM got $1,260 from the Principals Association of NPSL for they sponsored, of course, the Regional Wrestling Championship. And a Promethean board was given to the Kent School District Technology Support Services for the conference room that cost $3,500.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, there's a motion on the floor for approval of item number 6.10, gifts, donations, and memorials acceptance. All those in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. Is there another motion?
Yeah, we can just discuss the informational stuff, right? We don't have to move to discuss it, or how does
Did we,
that?
sorry, I just want to make sure all the rest of them got approved.
Yeah.
The rest of the consent
Oh,
agenda.
no, well, yeah, because we already did the consent.
Yeah, that's, thank you. Thanks for keeping me honest, everyone. Okay, so now we are moving on to informational items. Any discussion?
Yeah, I had a question on that. So I was trying to figure out, because like, we had heard earlier about the legal expenses of the district, and I tried to find any point in this document that showed what our legal expenses were, because I wasn't sure if that was accurate or not. But I don't know where that would be in here. Is it enumerated somewhere that I'm just missing?
So is your question that, is that something that's in the financial report?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to have Mr. Ben Rarick come to the podium, see if we can answer that.
Okay, just to clarify the question.
Yeah.
You wanted to know whether or not the financial statement specifically enumerated legal fees?
Or if they're part of a section that I don't
Yeah,
know.
they're definitely not specifically enumerated.
Okay.
So I'm sorry that I wasn't prepared for this question to be asked, so I'm trying to kind of do the best I can here. So on page maybe 6 would be one place where under contractual services, sort of under the object breakdown of expenditures, it would be represented
Okay.
on that line, but there is no specific enumeration of legal fees as distinct from maybe other professional services.
Is there anywhere that we do have that? Like,
Yes, so if I recall correctly, the last board meeting or 2 board meetings ago, you pointed out some legal expenses in the warrants list. Yeah, the voucher list. So that's where you will see sort of specific bills being paid to particular firms.
would we have to like go through and add all those up, or is there a place where we can look at like, this is how much the district spent last year, that's how much we spent 2 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever?
I'm sorry, what is your question?
If we have a place that like we can, so that the public, that they obviously have a question on it, is there a place they can go that they can see like how much has been spent each year in previous years?
Is there a place they can go to look at like just legal fees?
Yeah, just because they brought it up, and I want to make sure that we're being, you know, as transparent as we can about that.
I mean, they would, there's nothing in the annual financial report and the monthly financial reports that specifically enumerates that as distinct from other similar costs.
Okay. Would that be something we could maybe get together and provide to the public?
If that was a request of the board, I could respond to that.
Okay. I don't know how we request something like that. Is that something I have to move to do, or?
So I can help. If you would like to see those, definitely my team will take some time and get that. Typically, that's what we do. If there's a specific board member that wants to see some additional information, we can do that.
Yeah.
So why don't we start there, and we can do that. And so if we could connect and make sure we get the right question and what you need, I'd happy to have my team work on that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Okay, we are on final communication from the audience. Now we see if we have any additional cards that were turned in.
Ms. Santello?
Thank you, Superintendent Vela, President Margell, members of the board, Ms. Curry. One additional comment was submitted, I do believe, from previous submissions. There are still some to be heard, so I'll add this to the record.
Perfect, thank you. Our first comment will be made by Greta Nelson.
Good evening. My name is Greta Nelson. Well, first of all, good evening, school board, Superintendent Vila, and the community. My name is Greta Nelson. I'm a parent of a student within the Kent School District. I'm here to speak on Resolution 1669, voted on and approved at the last board meeting. With this public comment and my future actions, I intend to prevent the district and its board from delegating taxpayer authority from an elected board member to unelected municipal officers. Washington law defines a municipal officer and officer as the elected and appointed officers of a municipality, as well as their deputies and assistants. Given the precedent that this resolution sets, I demand an independent legal review and public report of all potential conflicts of interest regarding all board members, as well as all municipal officers and their appointees and assistants that would participate in exempt session regarding labor matters or policymaking. The resolution describes the prohibition of municipal officers from being beneficially invested, but the restrictive terms do not apply equally to all elected or appointed municipal officers. Per Washington law and public policy, our representative form of government is founded on a belief that those entrusted with the offices of government have nothing to fear from full public disclosure of their financial and business holdings, provided those officials deal honestly and fairly with the people. It is the intent and purpose of public policy to guarantee that each school board be held accountable for the proper operation of their district to the local community and its electorate. Each school board shall be vested with the final responsibility for the setting of policies. The disclosure laws shall be liberally construed to promote complete disclosure of all information respecting the financial affairs of elected officials and candidates, so as to assure that the public interest will be fully protected. In promoting such complete disclosure, the public policy shall be enforced so as to assure that the information disclosed will not be misused for arbitrary and capricious purposes, and to assure that all persons reporting information will be protected from harassment and unfounded allegations based on information they have freely disclosed. The resolution provides broad powers, and the Labor Policy Committee is authorized and directed to take such actions as in their judgment may be necessary or desirable to effectuate the provisions of this resolution, thereby removing authority from current and future board members and delegating that authority to unelected municipal officers. I am an electorate and aggrieved by Resolution 1669. I will be filing a challenge to this resolution in Superior Court on or before March 29th, which is this community's deadline for doing so, according to Washington law. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next comment is from Christy Padilla.
Good evening, President Margall, Superintendent Vela, members of the board, Ms. Curry. I'm coming to you tonight as an employee of the Washington Education Association. I am the lead negotiator for the Kent Education bargaining team. I don't think it's a secret that KEA is incredibly disappointed in the board's decision to exclude a WA-endorsed candidate who is pro-labor and disclose the fact that there could be a conflict of interest because he is married to a member of our bargaining unit. I have asked this question, and I only come to the board and ask a question of the board when I've exhausted my resources at the district level. So tonight I'm going to ask you a question. Usually nobody gets back to me, but perhaps this time they will. I'm going to keep trying. As I sit on the Kent bargaining team as their lead negotiator, so far in every session, which has been 2 days a week since February, there is a member of the district bargaining team who is married to a teacher in the KEA bargaining unit. And that person on the KSD bargaining team has the ability to have a say on whether or not our proposals move forward to the district. So I'm wondering how that is not a conflict of interest, because that has not been disclosed to us. It's just kind of knowledge that we all have. And we let it go because we thought we had a relationship with the district, that if there was an issue, they would come to KEA first before secretly taking it to the board. So I'm just wondering what constitutes, when it comes to negotiations, a conflict of interest and what does not. And maybe we could have a conflict of interest policy or committee that would maybe build some trust back between KEA and all of you. The other thing, I have 21 seconds. I do want to say that a comment was made. I think the question was rhetorical about why would an educator vote down the levy. The educators have no intent to vote down the levy. In fact, the KEA Executive Committee voted to endorse the levy tonight. So I'm hoping that anyone spreading that rumor would stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And our final comment tonight is from Tim Martin.
Good evening. I'm here because last week at the board meeting, you passed a proclamation to silence Mr. Cook under the guise that he had conflicts of interest because his wife is a teacher in this district. He, in our opinion, has no conflict of interest because he blatantly told this to everyone from the beginning and stated he would not vote on things that impact our bargain, that would impact his wife and she could benefit from. This is perceived, this action is perceived to have been an anti-labor, part of an anti-labor agenda. This is the same thing that led us to a strike, and it continues to be a concern. We talk about conflict of interest. Well, then let's be true about conflicts of interest. We have a member of our school board who sits on the KCDA Board of Directors. We have a contract with KCDA to purchase supplies. Is that a conflict of interest to have him sitting here making decisions on purchasing? We have the same school board member who was a former president of our union, yet he is involved in the contract and voting on what is appropriate and what is not. Is that a conflict of interest? We have a school board member whose spouse received a multi-million-dollar contract and approved it as a member of this board. Is that a conflict of interest? We have a deputy superintendent whose wife is an administrator in Kent, and, by the way, whose contract was quite good in their last negotiations. I question whether this is a conflict of interest because of his job responsibilities and her position. I am concerned that you put our teachers in a position where we are asked to carry the load and support levies, and we do. That is 100% true. Our exec board today voted to support the levy. Now it's up to our members and our rep council. It is hard for me to push issues when these things are happening. And I think even with the support of our teachers behind this levy, I am concerned that your actions have caused a great wedge between our community and what's best for our kids, to provide them with the things that they need, our buildings with their repairs that they need greatly, and the updates that are necessary. I'm asking that you consider the things that you are putting forward and voting on, and making comments such as conflict of interest real. The things that you have done and the conflicts that you have caused and the wedge that you have caused, not enough, I do not have enough support behind me to fill the gap that I am seeing you create. Please stop, think about the things that you're doing and the impact that you are having.
President Margell, we do have 2 videos, I believe, left. Ms. Santello?
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I graduated from the Kent School District 10+ years ago. While I was in the school district, I benefited a lot from the arts programs that the schools had. I participated in a lot of your guys' competitions. I was one of the last students at Kent Ridge who was able to take film photography every semester, all 4 years. And having programs such as art and music is so critical for today's youth, as we need creative outlets. It's hard to be in AP classes, your language classes, math, all those advanced classes, and not have those fun, creative classes that let you take a break throughout the school day, but also use another part of your brain to continue to grow. And I didn't know while I was in high school how much photography would impact my life today. But in so many aspects, it's got me to where I'm at. I chose not to study photography in college. However, because of my years taking photography and the teachers that I had who encouraged me, I was able to get scholarships that paid for my tuition because of photography, and got jobs because of photography that supported me being able to afford to go to school. And so I support passing this levy that's going to continue to allow kids to have art and music as clubs and classes that they can take.
And we have one additional.
Good evening, board members. My name is Allison Riley, and I am a parent in the district. I am here to discuss the 5th grade camp process. Last June, the board approved the professional services agreement between KSD and Osprey Camp. It was presented, discussed, and voted on as an experience all 5th grade students would have. There was excitement and a lot of promise around this. And while I understand and respect the complexities surrounding large-scale planning for school trips and the fact that something like this hasn't happened for the last few years, a lot of questions and concerns have arisen. 5th grade camp has been far from equitable for our KSD students. There are schools that have had their trips canceled, others that have only been allowed to attend for a single day, and others have been able to go for the full experience. I am seeing and hearing teachers, other parents, and principals frantically try to secure volunteers so that their schools can still attend. I myself have had to go and find volunteers for our school's trip to still happen. The agreement was signed last June. We as parents, the district, and school leadership all work with the same calendar. It was KSD's responsibility to ensure enough high school volunteers to make this camp a reality for all KSD 5th graders. The professional agreement is very clear. There were camps and training scheduled during high school finals, Ramadan, the break in February, and more. There was obviously a massive breakdown in communication planning when it came to getting enough high school volunteers to volunteer and make this a reality. I am very appreciative of the fact that many high school students have given up their time, some of them multiple times, to volunteer for this, and I'm also very appreciative of the parents who quickly dropped everything and rearranged their schedule to be able to attend. The district planning team in charge of this experience needs to do better. This was a massive grant, and it does not seem the district respected that money. There needs to be a thorough examination of the steps that were part of this process. Timing and communication, recruitment of volunteers, what schools were unable to attend and why were they unable to attend? How much work did individual schools have to do to ensure that their trip was actually reality? The sad fact of the matter is that many of our 5th grade students lost out on an amazing opportunity this year. The KSD signed the services agreement knowing its responsibilities, but didn't deliver. What message is this sending to the staff and students who didn't get to go at all or just had to go for one day? How is this striving for excellence? How is this equitable? Thank you.
That's the end of our communication from the audience for this evening. We now are moving to item number 8.02, board reports and discussion. It's a great time to be able to hear about the wonderful things that our students are doing. I do ask, and I've said this before, but now I get to have the gavel next to me, and I get to say a little more. We give our audience 3 minutes. I think as board members, I encourage all of you to try to stay within that 3 minutes too. If it's good enough for our audience, it should be good enough for us. And with that, Director Song?
Actually, can I go third? So I have time to get all of my notes down.
Sure.
Sorry.
Director Cook?
Okay. So I know that we don't read the comments that people make in written form anymore. I feel like that's a mistake. And I know it's probably because we're trying to do something different, but I feel like there are some people that, may have disabilities or even if they're just not comfortable either speaking publicly or doing so on video. And, it is nerve-wracking coming up and doing that. And so I can see why they might want to write it out instead. And I feel like it's a missed opportunity for us to speak those words to the public so that their words aren't hindered in any way in comparison to the more able-bodied of us that do not require that. And so that would be my only comment. I'm not going to read it. I had suggested that I would do that at one point, but I think we really should address that. And that's all I have for today.
If I may.
Yes, sure.
We did have that change to that policy. I do understand that it was before you joined the board. It is something that if the board so chooses, we can put it back on our agenda to look at again. We do, of course, and I just want to make sure that our community knows that when comments are submitted by writing, we literally get them right in front of us, and so all of us do read them. We also get them sent to us beforehand, so we can and take them very seriously. So thank you for your comments. I just wanted to make sure that there was not a confusion that we weren't getting those, though. Thank you. Did you have any other comments that you want to add?
No, I mean, just that part, I understand, like, we get them in written form, and we can read them, obviously. But I feel like there's a purpose in saying it out loud during a meeting, like there's a purpose in them coming up and speaking, and us not providing that avenue for those that are in written form, it just seems off to me. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Director Clark?
Last week, I visited Meadow Ridge Elementary, and it was an interesting visit. I got to see a couple of classrooms in action, but when we go to talk about the technology levy that's coming up in April, I watched a PE teacher who found himself, because of shortage of coverage, doubling the size of his PE class. And in that particular multi-purpose area where he was located, he had that adaptive technology that allowed the voice projection to every inch of that floor. And what that did was it allowed him to basically be able to be in contact with kids that were spread out so they weren't bumping into each other, and yet directly give directions and coordinate. He was a master at it. It was wonderfully done. And it illustrates that we are trying to put in more technology into the classroom to help more kids overcome barriers, but it costs money, and we're asking the public to basically support that in this upcoming levy. Last week also was, of course, a Communities in Schools celebration at Camden Ridge. Communities in Schools provides a number of services for the various schools and students in their needs, but the one that is most impressive for me is the mentor program, where an adult actually takes time to get to know a student and make them feel that they're being supported. There are kids that come from a wide variety of backgrounds, face some really deep troubles, and they want to be successful, but they can't always see their way through the cloud. And it's a program that I support, and I really believe that if you are particularly retired teachers that know how the education process works and you have the time, we have a place for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think number 3, that's what you asked for.
Yeah, just a random number, but I'm ready now.
Okay, thank you, Director Song.
Yeah, no, just wanted to start off with thanking everybody for, again, continuously showing up, speaking your voice, and giving us an opportunity to actually hear about a lot of the sentiments and public perception about how a lot of materials are coming together, how our discussions are being formatted, and then just, I guess, the trajectory and the course of how this board is trying to better develop and operate in a more efficient manner. A couple things that I also wanted to share in solidarity is the benefit to supporting programs such as iGrad and understanding that there's a huge need for inclusive education. There was a comment up here about asking whether or not there has been anybody who's had that experience. Myself as a clinician coming from an inpatient background, most of the kids who can't make it successfully in the community, those were the kids that I served during my time at Seattle Children's. I know what it's like to be in there, I've been bit, I've been stabbed, I've been set on fire, I've been knocked unconscious, I get it. And so I just want to share that information with the community to know that as the board continues to convene, have these discussions, that there's an ally at the table, and hopefully we can have more meaningful conversations around how do we support inclusive education, how do we maintain and preserve a lot of the services that our children who are more disadvantaged are in need of. And so just wanted to stand in solidarity with a lot of the community members today that came out. Oh, the other thing, there was a couple conversations that happened yesterday at the listening session at Kent City Hall, is that what it's called? Yeah. And there were a lot of really good suggestions about PTAs being formed, especially supports around parent-led or community-led groups with some of our underserved schools. And one of the suggestions that, or I guess volunteers that I made and also want to extend is with the Mill Creek specifically, but then also extending it to other PTA groups. If there's any time that a community member who's a part of any of those groups or organizations could feel like they could benefit from any kind of training or workshops on how do we deal with or support youth mental health, I'm more than happy to volunteer my time and provide pro bono supports and leading maybe like a 1-hour workshop or discussion with some of your groups so that we can talk a little bit more about youth mental health, navigating systems, services, and then what are some of the more tangible skills that I can help equip the families, the teachers, staff personnel to be able to take back. I know it's not a solution, but it's just a small step towards the progress that we're trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Song. Vice President Farah.
Yes, thank you, President Margell. I just wanted to mention that last Saturday I had the pleasure of visiting Kent Robotics. They had an event at Auburn High. This is a regional event. They put together a robot, and you are amazed. If any of you get a chance to go, please do. These kids are amazing. They put together that robot from actually asking donations from multiple organizations, parents. They have volunteers that have been through the club and also now coming back to mentor younger kids and making sure that it's part of CTE. And as an engineer, that really made me, giggle. So I really want to make sure that they came to present us last year. So if we can bring them back, sometime, I really appreciate that. And I wanted to also make a plug and say, if you want to donate to that club, don't hesitate. They're looking for any kind of financial ability to not only put together the robots, but also the supplies that they buy it out of their pocket. So it costs about $30,000 a year. So that's a big chunk of change. And just wanted to bring that up. I want to kind of talk about, things that, people come up and really say comments and bring up stuff. I want to say this. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You just can't come here and tell us something that is not true and say it as is a fact. It kind of baffles me. People who say they care about the kids, but yet bring an attitude of disrupting adults talking to each other. You may not agree with the person is saying, but at least have the respect to listen to the person so that you can at least hear what they are saying, where they're coming from. You may agree with them, after all, but at least you have the ability to listen. We're adults. We are an example to the kids. And what do we say and what do we do? I mean, I had to apologize to some of the kids in this board meeting because of the adults and how they were behaving. I just wanted to say that because we're all here for the kids. And whether you agree or not, we're all from the same community. We're all in this together. We're not at each other's throat. We don't have to be belligerent to each other. So the idea of just keep on fighting about someone because they don't agree with you 100%, it's just, it doesn't make sense to me. And I don't understand sometimes where the animosity is coming from, because we're all doing selfless work. We're doing work that benefits our community. I'm no different than you. I'm one of you who decided to serve the community. I'm not this evil thing that you have to fight. I'm part of you. I'm nothing different than you are. I just decided that I wanted to do some service for the community that has welcomed me and my family, and to make sure that we act to each other accordingly. So I don't want to dwell on it, but it just drives me nuts to see the animosity and the level of anger that we have in this community nowadays. It's an unfortunate. I want to conclude by saying thank you to the staff. This district is what it is because of this staff. And I really want to tell you this. In my opinion, you are the best. And I will never stop saying thank you. Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Farah. Today I want to talk about some of the proclamations that we had. Music and School Month. Last month I got the opportunity to be able to see learning at its best and through the arts, and see at Kent Ridge High School, the Strand choirs from our elementary schools up through our middle schools, and then culminating at the high school, and just seeing that progress and just the love in that room of music and what we teach our kids, and just the development and seeing that. It was just exciting to see. Not enough choirs, but I also give a lot of respect to the parents. I know in elementary school, it's taking them early, figuring out carpools and how to get them there. And so thank you to our parents that do that and support our choirs and seeing how they come to fruition in our middle schools and our high school. I also got to see similar band and see our 5th grade band, and then seeing what happens between 5th grade and the love that they start with it there, and then how much different it is when they get to middle school. And they were really good. They were really good. Even the saxophone players, it was fun. I have a love for the saxophone players. I married one. And then of course in the high school, just amazing work, and just so proud of our students, and of course the teachers that get them there, and of course the parents that support and the community that supports along the way. As somebody who really wanted to learn the trombone when I was a kid and we couldn't afford it, I really thank those people who help make it so every student that wants to play an instrument in our district can play it. So I think that is something I'm so proud of being part of Kent School District. See, I'm gonna cry. And I only have 3 minutes. Okay, Crestwood sang at the national anthem at the Thunderbirds game. So super fun to watch. And then just a shout out to DeMiro Jazz Festival. I know at least our Kent Ridge Jazz Choir was there and did a fantastic job ending the entire show on Thursday night. And I had a sophomore coming home bubbling with energy at 10 p.m. at night when I'm trying to wind down because she was just excited about music and the difference it makes in her life. And just thank you for supporting that. It is Women in History Month, and I want to use this moment to shout out to, it was said in the proclamation that Director Singh gave, is how many of our volunteers we see in our schools are the women in our community. And as somebody who did the thankless job of PTA treasurer, it is hard, and I am super thankful for all of the women that make such a difference. And you don't just have 1 month, it is every month, and we should be celebrating it every day. Great, we got to hear a little bit about the listening session with Mayor Ralph and Chief Padilla. What a great experience. Thank you so much, and of course, Superintendent Vela. And just loved hearing the ideas and the support of our community to be able to keep our students safe once they leave our doors. And then just the excitement of how do we get involved. And I look forward to that continuing. I want to end on thank you to our students. You're the reason we do all of this. I loved hearing the focus on students tonight, and hope that that continues to be the focus that we hear every night, because that is the only focus we should have. So with that, it is 8:38, and we conclude this meeting, and we are adjourned.